Well, good afternoon, councillors, those here in attendance, as well as anybody who is streaming in. As a part of our cultural development and our learning, we had a great session around acknowledgements and welcomes to country. So I would like Councillor Dawkins, if you may please open our ordinary meeting today at 1 p.m. with your acknowledgement to country.
The City of Launceston is where Laikila, the north-esk, Pipa-Tumila, south-esk, and Kanamaluka, Tame Estuary converge. I acknowledge and pay respects to the Palawa people, the original and traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and I pay tribute to elders past and present, and to all Palawa people for their deep connection to sky, land and waterways. City of Launceston, like all colonial institutions, has a long way to go to decolonise, and I acknowledge that painful truth.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. You may be seated. Oh, thank you. So we have no attendance apologies as a part of today's ordinary meeting, but I do have an acknowledgement that I would like to make as well. So as we do kick off our meeting, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the former City of Launceston Alderman, and it was Alderman at the time, and Deputy Mayor Annette Waddle, who passed away last week, or this week, on the 26th of June, yesterday. Annette first ran for council in 1989, and that's when she was first elected. She became the only female serving alderman and only the fifth woman to ever serve on the City of Launceston Council. In her 21-year term, you've got a little bit to go yet, Deputy Mayor, 6.5 as Deputy Mayor, Annette was well known and beloved for her passionate representation and advocacy, particularly for the Lilydale community. There was no issue too small or too big for Annette when it came to making sure that people of Lilydale were getting the best deal possible, whether it be in terms of infrastructure, assets, or just having a strong voice in the wider council and government decisions. And it was always and will always be remembered for decades of her devoted and outstanding public service and advocacy. And on behalf of the Launceston City Council, we do extend our deepest sympathies to her family, friends and loved ones, and all those who will miss her. Moving through now to declarations of interest at agenda item 3, noting that today we do have sponsorships and grants. There will be a few declarations of interest. So if I may just go around the room for declarations. Councillor Harris.
Item 13.2, I believe.
Thank you, yes.
Major event sponsorship.
Thank you. Whilst the others look through for their paperwork, I also have two as well at 13.2 and 13.3. Deputy Mayor at 13.2. Thank you. Any further declarations of interest? Okay, there being none, we will move forward to the confirmation of minutes. So the recommendation is that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the City of Launceston Council held on the 13th of June be confirmed as true and correct record. Somebody to move. Councillor Palmer, a seconder. Councillor Dawkins. All those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Moving to council workshops at agenda item 5. 5.1 are the workshops conducted between the 13th and 20th of June. The recommendation is that council notes the council workshops that were conducted and attended since the last council meeting for these purposes described. New Year's Eve event sponsorship 24-26, QV Mag strategic instrument review, protrusions over roads and footpaths, permission to amend sealed plan 1630 Waverley Road, Waverley, Northern Tasmanian Alliance for Resilient Councils, Launceston Future Housing Discussion, Tamar NRM update. Somebody to move that that's correct record. Councillor Britton, seconded by Councillor Kai. Anybody like to speak as the mover? Anything as the second, Councillor Kai? Anything from around the table? No further comments? Nothing to close? Okay, putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. We have no councillors' leave of absence or community reports identified as a part of this agenda. So moving forward to 8, public question time. 8.1 is public questions on notice. We'll see at 8.1.2, Robin Smith with disability parking permits and City Heart strategy. Larissa Allen around the concerned safety of children crossing road in Georgetown Road. That's all that I've got here in my agenda. So moving to 8.2, which is public questions without notice, noting that the rules and regulations are available and displayed upon entry. You may ask a total of 3 questions each. Public questions without notice. None from the floor? Mr. Smith.
I'm sure I can think of one, Mr. Mayor. Robin Smith on behalf of Coffee Republic. Follow-on supplementary question to the disability parking answer you gave me. The word really, and I stressed it a couple of times, I'm looking for is to be clear and say free on the website. It isn't, even with this response, Mr. Mayor. This sentence doesn't help. It says in the middle of the response, the additional time in the space is free so long as the maximum time is paid for. Now, that is not a lot different from what's on the current council's website, and it was actually a question asking if council would reflect and look at how clear it was on the website itself. So it actually isn't as clear as perhaps it could be. Not that I'm a wordsmith and going to say how it should be written, but I know when I stand in the street working in where I do, a lot of people aren't sure about that additional time, notwithstanding all that it says, that additional time is free. And I think that's what I keep going on about, and I actually spelled it out, F-R-E-E is the word I'm looking for on the website, and making it clear that that is free. There are people that pay, you see, and you can actually effectively feed the meter. Is that, again, something that could be looked at, please?
Okay, so acting CEO, just looking at how we will review that process
thanks,
again.
Mr. Smith, we note your concerns and we'll review the website wording to ensure it's consistent with plain language.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Second question. Christmas tree. In the Brisbane Street Mall, every year the tree is erected and set up. Every year, without fail, it's damaged, sometimes to the point where there's no lights left. I've asked a couple of years questions and answer from you, Mr. Mayor, which I thank you, was the security guards we put there. They didn't work, Mr. Mayor, this year. And never before has anyone actually got to the top of that tree and removed the lights and stars from the very top. That's the first time. And that was with a security guard there. So clearly that didn't work. I asked a question 23rd of July 2020 about raising the fence, 9th of September 2021, 7th of December 2023, and 14th December 2022. And there's a motion to raise the height of the fence. You did suggest that was something, raising the height of the fence, although your predecessors were concerned that a higher fence meant someone would fall further if they were to try to climb a higher fence around the tree. However, but I think as this last year we've seen, height of the fence is not as significant as the height of climbing to the top of the tree. Is that something you could look at again? And
Yes, for sure. I think we did address that. We were looking at mechanisms that were around the country into the angles of the ways in which we could try and avoid the ease of climbing. We're close to Christmas in July, so I guess it's sort of almost relevant, but we're getting in nice and early. So thank you for your question, and we'll continue to have a look around what that sort of looks like as we go forward around the safety of our Christmas tree and the Christmas spirit that's been heavily invested into by this council for the last couple of years, for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. As you know, I work in a cafe in the Brisbane Street Mall, and the comings and goings of customers as I work in a cafe is everything to us. One of the biggest changes to the flow in the city is this City Heart Stage 2. And again, I will return to the questions I've had about the relocation of the bus stops in St John Street, because it is, I believe, so important to us. First thing I'll point out and preface, if I may, look at the metro. This is talking about the bus relocations in Launceston. This is the Launceston CBD bus interchange. This has been on their website for at least a decade, 10 years. I've extracted it today, a couple of hours ago, so it's still there today, and it was there certainly. I've got a copy of it in May 2014. I'll read it if I may. Metro believes that relocating Launceston CBD bus interchange away from their current position in St John Street would be detrimental to bus patrons and hurt city businesses. A couple of pages of it, I'm not going to read it. The question I asked about the GHD report was it only looked at some buses, approximately 50%, and having spoken to Metro, I think it was about 250,000 passenger movements that were missed off that GHD report, and that's not including all of the other activities that I mentioned a fortnight ago, which are the routing, safety, traffic, buses, where buses pull out, networking, etc. 24th of April 2017, I asked, what was this bus relocation based on? And the response I got was little more than the GHD report. When I look at the GHD report, and it relies on having looked at the changes and suggesting that they point to the bus interchange in Meyer Birchall's car park as being the best option. I just can't see that, Mr. Mayor. I just can't see that there's anything that supports that. So other than the GHD report that doesn't seem to say that, is there anything else that suggests that that interchange is the solution? Bearing in mind that Metro still today don't say it's the solution.
Okay. Acting CEO, any further reports that we can say? I can have a personal note to say that we met with the new infrastructure, or what's the portfolio of Minister Abetz? State growth, and the Deputy Premier we met with this week to say that we are still advocating for not only the routes but the positions of what the buses look like, and strongly advocated to say that we would be more forceful on cooperation around where those routes are going as to the requirements of what they look like, particularly on St John Street. And the Deputy Premier said to me that whilst there's 3 outside of Sweet Brew, there's actually a business case that they want 4 there in some instances, where I know if you would talk to business owners in that very area, they would say that there's very often 3. So to note that we are advocating strongly as this week with the state government to work with better solutions for public transport. So something, do we have any more reports? What reports do we use?
I don't think the GHD report actually covered, that was only looking at on-street, I believe, from memory. I think from Council's perspective is we want a public transport system that where people can easily connect from one service to another, has quality infrastructure in which people can comfortably wait and feel safe. And so we want a solution that can provide that. At the moment, we of course don't provide bus services, but we are, as the Mayor said, working with the state to try and provide improvements in our services. At this point in time, we know there's issues with the current infrastructure because they are disconnected, the infrastructure's ageing, and we would like a better solution. What that solution is has to be developed in partnership with the state government.
I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, there being none, we will continue through to Planning Authority at agenda item 9. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in agenda item 9, Planning Authority. Now, we do have a withdrawal from today's agenda of 9.2. So 9.1 is the first, which is 23 Beverly Hills Road, Newstead, residential construction of an additional dwelling. Before we get to officer recommendation, do we have any speakers from the public? Please, make your way to the microphone, just your name and suburb.
Jonathan Buist. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Councillor Britton.
Thank you. Jonathan Buist, DCM Design Construction Management, live in Lagana. So just in regards to 23 Beverly Hills, the development application that you're considering at the moment, I think it's important just to make the note, I'm sure you're all aware and interested in infill development and vibrancy of the city. I think it's an important matter to continue. I think infill development is part of the strategy to keep our suburbs and city vibrant. The infill development will then sort of push into inner city living as well. So that's the first point I just wanted to make. The second one is obviously this will mean change to context, neighbours and the like. So that sort of infill development needs to be appropriate, and that's what we've done in this design. So we've considered carefully overshadowing of any neighbours. We've considered carefully the privacy of any neighbours. You'll see it's an extensive shadow diagram that's been prepared both in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. So we're very confident with that aspect of it. In terms of privacy, there is bedrooms which really run along the boundary. So there's no living areas that are confronted against each other. So we think that that all works and the scale is appropriate to the area. I'll just note too, the footprint of development now is under 30% of the total site area, which I think is quite appropriate for an infill development in that area. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any further speakers? Okay, there being none, we'll move to the recommendation, and that recommendation is that a permit be granted for 23 Beverly Hills Road, Newstead, subject to the published conditions. That is the additional dwelling. So somebody to move the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. And I will open just with a couple of questions that have been raised in some of the submissions, if I can. And one is in regard to the classifying, I guess you would say, of some residential blocks to be used for units and others not to be used for units, and whether that is applicable when a planning scheme changes. There were some comments about that this subdivision originally was a larger residential subdivision, and now I believe it falls into general residential. So I'm just interested to understand the background behind that, if we can understand that, and also understand what happens to what was at the time the rules, which are now changed when we get to where we are today.
Thank you, Councillor Harris.
If you need more explanation, feel free to.
Planning Manager Richard.
I think, without knowing the absolute details of the question and what was in the mind of the author, the planning rules do change from time to time. But as I understand Beverly Hills Road, it's always been in a residential zone. Now, I've been here at least more than 20 years, and over that time, unit developments have always been allowable in residential zones. There has from time to time had things about numbers in particular streets, and I'm not sure how that old provision would apply to Beverly Hills Road. It doesn't look on first principles a road with too many units, but I admit I haven't done the calculations. In any event, that's not relevant now. The general residential zone at the moment is a zone which allows units subject to consideration of the amenity impacts. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think the old rule used to be something like 10% in any number of blocks were being allocated for unit development, and the other 90% were for single dwellings. However, as you say, that no longer applies. We're here today with the current rules. And I guess that's where we're at. It will be a change to the neighbours of 23 Beverly Hills Road, because that particular house is interestingly set well back from the road. And most of the time when we're looking at a second dwelling on a larger block, it is in the backyard that the second dwelling is being built. In this case, it is going to be built in the front yard. As the architect spoke, he has planned for that and has designed an appropriate house that fits in. It will obviously be a new house in a street of established houses, mostly established houses, and so it will stand out. However, it does not stand out in a negative way, in my opinion, and I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And the only planning discretion that we have, based on what has been put forward, is in regard to the setbacks and building envelopes. And again, they are just minor excursions into those things just to make it fit, but while still providing a usable outdoor area, but also amenity for the residents of the proposed residents, but also for the protection of the neighbours as well. Whilst there will be some overshadowing around this time of year on the 21st of June into their dining area, they are lucky that the dining area has north-facing windows as well, and of course later in the year when the sun does poke its head out, unlike today so much, then it will have plenty of sun because the sun will be higher in the sky. So quite happy to support this motion today and the officer's recommendation to allow the development of a second dwelling on 23 Beverly Hills Road.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor is the seconder.
Thanks, Mayor. I stand to support the motion as well. Interestingly, before we drove out there, I thought, oh, another building in a cul-de-sac always worries me with traffic management. It's an interesting cul-de-sac. Most cul-de-sacs only have sort of circular car parking in the cul-de-sac. This has actually got a big bit in the middle with some vegetation and 5 park-off areas, so it's actually better than most cul-de-sacs that you actually see in this day and age. So I'm very comfortable. I think one of the complaints was about parking. The development actually meets the parking requirements, I think, of 2 car parks plus one visitor car park. So therefore, there is no parking discretion required in regards to anything. In regards to the setbacks, that's the only thing that we need to look at. Performance criteria. I think at 10 a.m. on the 21st of June, there's still some sunlight going into the top windows into the property next door, and the only windows that are probably not getting any sunlight are the garage or the workshop underneath, which are not a habitable room and therefore don't apply. And also, interestingly, as Councillor Harris said, there are significant windows on the front which give adequate light into that property anyway. So in my view, the unit development, noting, and I pass my respects on to Annette White's family, if there was a unit development, Annette would vote against it every time, regardless of what the rules were. But PD4 or PD1, I think back in about 2012 or thereabouts, changed the rules in regards to the ability to put multiple dwellings in streets. So there are no applications in regards to that any longer. This is actually quite a good multiple dwelling. Usually you think about it in the way of units. This is actually a house. And I think it actually fits quite nicely into the streetscape.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Further speakers to the item? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. And so many times, as the previous speaker noted, that when you see that there's going to be a subdivision or a strata title, concerns of people's amenity immediately arise. And having read through the representations, I'm certainly sympathetic to the existing residents of the street. If we look at their objections essentially to parking, well, it has been answered by the on-site provision of parking. Certainly there is the case that people can reasonably think that when they buy into an area of single dwelling properties, might reasonably expect that it would stay that way, but it is true that there's a changing nature of society. There is more demand for properties in the urban area, and this is one way that people find to address that issue. I'm not saying that completely mitigates their concerns, because it's true, when you buy a property in a street and you think, well, this has a certain density of population, it's reasonable to expect that that shouldn't change a lot. And I suppose my point there is I don't think it is actually changing a lot. It's a cul-de-sac, it's not a through road. Yes, it is an additional dwelling to that house. As pointed by the previous speaker, it is a single standalone house rather than a unit or a detached property. So in that sense, it fits into the nature of the street. And thirdly is the issue of overshadowing. And I stand to address this today to say so many times, as people around the table will know, I've objected to developments such as this, albeit this one's interesting, it's in the front yard rather than the backyard, because they are double-storey properties. They do overshadow not necessarily neighbours' houses, sometimes they do, but more noticeably overshadowing neighbours' yards and taking away that amenity. Building too close to the boundary, taking away people's privacy, overlooking people's backyards, taking away that privacy. And I do want to acknowledge that this development in many ways addresses those issues. And in doing so, I wish to encourage people to look at an example like this and see what can be achieved. Is it perfect? No. Will anything ever be perfect? No. There are always going to be pressures to develop available land, whether it's vacant land or whether it is land that is, at present a part of a larger property. But when I look at this, and as I say, with sympathy to those who have put in representation, and it may not mean much to them because I definitely am going to support this motion today, but I will say that this outcome is so much more desirable than some that we have seen around this table and will continue to see. So I beseech people who are looking at doing an infill development to look at an example like this, to take it as it is, an opportunity to have minimal impact on your neighbours, not no impact, but minimise that impact in all ways possible. Build single story rather than double story. Build by and large within the envelope that goes with that property, and build in a style that is not out of character to the neighbourhood in which that building is going. So I do rise and sit, Chair, to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Further comments around the table? Anything to close, Councillor Harris?
Nothing further to add.
Thank you. Let's put it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Just to reiterate that 9.2 has been withdrawn from today's agenda. At agenda item 10, we see the announcements by the Mayor, 10.1. They're published in the agenda. At 11, councillor reports. Do we have any councillor reports? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. On Monday, I went up to the shed at Rochalee, Kinbilly, to witness the new laser cutter that had been installed up at the shed, something we're very proud of at the northern suburbs, which is absolutely fantastic what it's been able to do. It can do lots of woodworking things. It cut out a whole heap of penguins for the Antarctic Division to be painted up by school children. So a number of community exercises that can go on, and they actually did a fantastic plaque memorialising one of our past members of the shed who passed away and left a significant bequest which enabled us to buy the laser cutter. I just hope that the people of Rochalee and surrounds actually avail themselves of going along to the shed and learning what this piece of equipment can actually do and what it actually may be able to do. And I'm hoping that there's some social enterprise activities that they may well be able to do on behalf of council in regards to signage and various things like that, because it's an absolutely state-of-the-art piece of equipment and it's fantastic that it's been housed in the northern suburbs. Yesterday I attended a farewell for Nettie Burr out at Dover Street. I know she's got an official farewell in a couple of weeks' time, but I think it's the day of our next council meeting. But I went out to say farewell to Nettie, who's been a stalwart and a long-term general manager out at Starting Point Neighbourhood House. She's contributed a huge amount to that community and the northern suburbs in general. And I just wish her well and thank her for the many, many years of service that she's given that community, because she's certainly left a mark.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Gibson.
Thanks so much, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for sharing those words. No doubt made a huge contribution. And Mayor, I want to follow your words with regard to the late Annette Waddle. and thank you for those. It was a great pleasure for some of us around the table to have had the opportunity to have worked with Annette. Of course, she first came to prominence as the president of the Tasmanian Housewives Association. And with her election in 1989, in her own words, said that she was someone who spoke for and represented ordinary people. But those of us who, in staff and elected reps, who worked with Annette would describe her as anything other than ordinary. With the creation of her fascinators and her weekly stall at the Esk Market, with her tenacious fighting spirit that would always want to ensure that you never got Annette offside, with her ability to produce and bring forward any piece of paperwork from the first meeting that she was in attendance at 25 years ago through to the last. She kept every piece of council correspondence that was ever presented to her and could always be called upon to present it as necessary. Indeed, much to the distaste of some management as debates ensued. She, of course, together with her late husband, John, they were renowned for the work they did in the community and living in Vermont Road, and thus that's where the title of the Mayor of Mowbray came from, with Annette fiercely advocating for those people who needed someone to speak on their behalf. Of course, as the Deputy Mayor, she had to lead our community through a very challenging time with the untimely passing of the late John Lees, who was the Mayor when she was the Deputy. And of course, that was a very sad time for the community when John Lees passed away so unexpectedly. And she did that with an amazing spirit, together with the work that she did at Theatre North for a number of years, serving as the council's representative. She is so proud now, one of her grandchildren who is involved in theatrical productions. She also, you won't believe it, owned the fastest and most powerful Mini that you could possibly imagine. And indeed, she would park that Mini, Mayor, in any car spot in what was then referred to as the councillor's car park, sometimes even if it meant parking in front of doors that prevented staff being able to get into the office. But more than that, she worked fiercely for the betterment of our community. She was very loyal. She developed relationships with staff and always advocated for the work of staff. She always celebrated the work of staff. She always had the difficult conversations and she always called people out when she thought they were wrong, but she always had the best interests of the community at heart. And so, as you did, Mayor, I want to recognise and celebrate the life of Annette Waddle, celebrate the 25 years of contribution to civic life, and pay our respects for someone who's gone before us as a fierce and hard-working advocate for Launceston.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Just a further comment, Deputy Mayor.
I actually mean to make a comment myself, and I slipped down my notes, but I just like to just sort of acknowledge Annette, who was a fantastic bastion for this community. As Councillor Gibson said, she was the Mayor of Mowbray, and I used to visit her regularly when I was coming home for the tip because there was always room in their front yard for me to park, her and John, and they were always welcoming, but as I say, very passionate, particularly about Mowbray and Lilydale in the way that she pursued matters in regards to that. And certainly a person, and she was the one who recommended that I go onto the Theatre North board, so I took her place and I've been very proudly, hopefully discharging responsibilities to them somewhat near what she did, but I think she was there at the opening of the original Earl, and I'm probably going to be there to see it knocked down and rebuilt. Anyway, she was a fantastic person for the community, and I think that's what you get about community representation. She was a sensational, tenacious, but a fantastic person to go with it.
Thank you, Deputy. Further councillor reports around the table? Okay, there being none, we'll move forward to councillors' questions. 12.1, councillors' questions on notice. We'll see at 12.1.1, Councillor Gibson's recording of the historical street naming that came up last meeting at 12.1.2, as well with the 23-24 budget amendments. We'll see there also at 12.1.3, Councillor Pentridge around parking around UTAS Stadium and the rezoning in Merino Street. Councillor Professor Raze, budget amendments, pavement management. And also Councillor Pentridge around the NTCA facility management. At 12.2, councillors' questions without notice. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. With the state government rebate for e-bikes expended, would the City of Launceston consider an e-bike rebate as a part of the clean air strategy?
Sure. Acting CEO. Quick answer.
Happy to consider that.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And again, I don't need an answer straight away on this. I do apologise for not giving advance notice. I had a member of the community contact me regarding Coronation Park and play equipment, and I have a sense in my mind that we've actually somebody's asked this question before, just about the upgrade. It's a fairly significant park in Launceston, great facilities from the point of view of playing soccer and dog walking off leash, but the actual play equipment that is there is probably a bit substandard for this day and age, and with lots of young families in and around that area. Just wondering, I don't believe it is in next year's budget, but it may well be in our place-based strategy. I'm just wondering if somebody could give me a timeline as to when that park might be considered for refurbishment. Don't need the answer now.
Take it on notice? Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Further questions? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair, and I do rise to ask a few questions, perhaps in light of this being our acting CEO's final council meeting. I'd like to acknowledge that and perhaps just put a full stop or perhaps an ellipsis to a few of these issues as they will be ongoing. I just wish to ask via you, Chair, has there been any progress or communication with Dorset Council administration in regards to the upgrades to the Lilydale Reserve as was planned some time ago?
Yes, acting CEO.
Actually, the Mayor and I met with Dorset Council, maybe last week?
No, this week.
This week, with their General Manager and Commissioner. So the intent is to have a discussion around that at a future workshop.
Thank you. When it comes to Patterson Barracks and a motion that I put to Council some time ago now for us to do a business case into the possibility of Launceston Council petitioning to acquire that site for purposes of community benefit. Where has that process landed, and when should we expect any further developments?
Acting CEO.
There's been quite a comprehensive draft report prepared, but I've been unable to progress that. But it's getting close to being able to workshop.
Great, thank you.
And finally, the council recently awarded the tender to the Launceston Historical Society for the former Frederick Street Kindergarten. I know that we do have money in the budget allocated to potentially carry out any necessary repairs or improvements to that property, but where does that process sit, and when should the community expect to see some development in that area, indeed the habitation of the building?
Thank you, Councillor Walker. General Manager Louise.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Walker. In terms of timelines for activation at the site, they're unknown at the moment. Councillor officers are currently working with the Historical Society around a lease that they need to bring back to Council for formal endorsement. Then they'd have their lease and they can get moving on their project. They're very keen. They'd be in there tomorrow if we had the lease ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I will have some further questions when it comes to the actual forecast budget, but I will conclude by thanking the acting CEO for the work that he has provided to the City of Launceston.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Further questions without notice? Okay, we'll move forward through to 13, Community and Place Network. 13.1 is the New Year's Eve sponsorship 24-26. Don't believe we have any speakers from the public around this agenda item. So we'll move forward to the recommendation is that Council notes that the Launceston Beer Fest New Year's Eve event has been identified as a major signature event and approves the application by Beer Fest to receive sponsorship recommended below in the agenda for the New Year's event. And it notes that the amount listed in the agenda will be included in the budget estimates for 24-25, 25-26, 26-27, which has not yet been adopted. Somebody to move the recommendation. Councillor McMahon. Seconded by Councillor Palmer. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. I think given that this is the only New Year's Eve event we have in Launceston, I think it's essential that the council continues to offer funding so that our community does have this to celebrate bringing in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I second this wonderful event and the new ideas that they're bringing to the table as far as inclusion, accessibility. They're hoping to provide different sort of avenues for people who are in a wheelchair. Also safe spaces for children to attend the event. So I think this is a wonderful event, and I hope that the council sees it the same way as I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. A question, Deputy Mayor?
Just a question regarding the 3-year timeline. Am I right in understanding that all the other major events have already been given a 3-year timeline? Is that correct? So they've already been renewed for 3 years? No? Okay.
The major signature events were assessed last year.
Yeah, so they were for 3 years, except this one?
Yes, so this runs at a separate timeline.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins, then a question, Councillor Harris.
Yes, I remember a Launceston that didn't have any New Year's Eve events. It was pretty much after Christmas just to leave town and come back at some point when you've done something celebratory at that time of the year. So this is welcome and warranted that we've been able to move on and have an event all of our own. The only thing I would say is we have heard from younger members of the community. They want to make sure that there are safe alcohol-free events for community as well around this time. So I think it's really incumbent on these organisers to make sure they're really safe spaces and not just ticking the box, but making sure they really are safe. From the perspective of animal welfare, I can't wait for the day that it doesn't include fireworks. Every year there are deaths on the road as a result of animals being terrified. Messaging around this is really, really important. So if we can make sure that we do all we can to include pet owners, because there is absolutely a spike in dog deaths straight after any fireworks.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. A question, Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a question with, we currently live in times of about, inflation of 3 to 4%, but we don't seem to increase the amount of sponsorship to allow for that. So effectively, the $46,000 in 3 years' time will be less, probably $10,000 buying power than it has now, or $5,000. Is there any provision within sponsorship arrangements to, particularly those for multiple years, to account for inflation?
Thank you, Councillor Harris. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. This is something we'll look at as part of the event strategy.
Yep, as part of the review. Yep, thank you. Deputy Mayor to speak.
Thank you. I rise to support the motion. The reason I asked my first question was because I think there are some change. We're going through an event strategy review, and therefore that will come back and hopefully address the issues that were raised by Councillor Harris. And therefore, I was questioning the wisdom as to why we were giving a 3-year extension for this particular one, but I think it just dovetails in with the other major signature sponsorship events that we did last year. So I think that therefore it's appropriate, and I think it's interesting, or it's important to note the narrative by the officers around the fact that just because we've approved it for this year for a particular way, we can actually work with the providers to ensure that if we've got a different direction or the way that we want the funding of that $46,000 the next 2 years, we can actually work with them to try and tailor it to appropriate things and maybe take into consider some of those things that Councillor Dawkins have said, and I endorse the situation with the fireworks. I mean, I'd love to see them go, 'cause I love fireworks, but I also know what happens to my two dogs every time they go off. But again, I guess that gets back to responsible pet ownership, but noting that it's not only pets that get affected by this, these are wild animals that are in the bush nearby. So it's an unfortunate situation that we have to try and work through, but as long as we can minimise that impact, that would be great as well.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Gibson.
Thanks so much. I also rise to support the recommendation, noting the high score that this event achieved, having gone through a process, and noting, of course, that this was an advertised round that enabled any event organisers, event companies, indeed not-for-profit groups, to put forward an application, as was the case when we developed the concept of having a specific round for New Year's Eve, noting it was important for council to have a signature event. Noting as well that, of course, other councils do organise their own civic event on New Year's Eve. I think that's important to note, and specifically I reference the outstanding work of the Burnie City Council, who have moved away from fireworks to last year an outstanding drone display, which was incredible. I think, though, to be fair, we originally, when we set up the funding mechanism, did include mechanism in there to ensure that there was a signature firework event, ensuring that not only those people in attendance at the event, but those around the valley could see the fireworks. We've certainly changed and grown and developed as a community, and I look forward to seeing some of those things encapsulated in the events review that's currently being undertaken. Also want to acknowledge that it is the most difficult time to stage an event, and that event infrastructure costs for that time of year are at an absolute premium. And to acknowledge, over the years, we've seen groups such as Festivali stage the New Year's Eve event. We've seen, indeed, a group of locals work together at our stadium to stage an event. And we look forward into the future for smaller groups and smaller events being able to ensure that everyone, not only those that like beer, not only those that can afford to go to a large-scale event, can bring in the new year while staying in Launceston.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Further comments around the table? Councillor McMahon to close. Putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? It's all councillors present. The motion is carried. So there's going to be a little bit of movement with ins and outs as we come into 13.2 and the rest of this section at 13. For our major event sponsorship round 1 at 13.2, do we have any speakers from the public before we get there first at majors? So 13.2 does. So if you would just move to the microphone, Councillor. Yep, thanks, Councillor Britton. Just your name and suburb, please.
Donna Bain, Youngtown. Good afternoon. I am the chair of the Tamar Community Peace Trust. Imagine a cool, clear morning in September. A gentle breeze rustles the colourful peace banners draped from poles in Mowbray. Banners handmade by the local community with messages of peace and friendship. A group of school students have gathered in the school hall, listening intently to Laura Johnson talk passionately about mental health and inspiring students and staff to explore the 2024 Peace Festival theme, Peace, It Starts With Me. Down at the Wellness Hub in the new St Luke's building, a local women's friendship group of migrants are catching up on the news of the day. And as the day draws to a close, a crowd gathers in a darkened movie theatre to watch Next Goal Wins, a movie which is a little bit about soccer, but much more about inclusion, courage and hope. This is the 2024 Tamar Valley Peace Festival in full swing. From the 16th to the 29th of September, the festival will host over 30 community events, 15 peace in school activities, and connect with over 5,000 people. The website for council describes Launceston as a city building its future. We at the Tamar Valley Peace Festival are working in our communities so we can all share in a city that is welcoming and peaceful. We ask the City of Launceston to support and join us to host the 2024 Tamar Valley Peace Festival so that together we can build a more harmonious Launceston, a community that is connected, inclusive, respectful, safe and joyful. This is our imagined future for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. So, with 13.2 and the declared interest that we have, I'm going to step out first as a part of the Carols Committee. The Deputy Mayor will step out as a part of the Launceston Musical Society. And then Councillor Harris as a part of Sally's Ride. And then we will come back we'll come back after our individual. So you stay in for now, in and out. Yes, in and out. And then we'll do the balance. No. Why wouldn't you not want to vote on the ones that you can vote on? There's 3 there that you can vote on. Yeah. So I'm going to head up first. So Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I'm not.
So the first one that we're discussing today is the Launceston Carols by Candlelight, which is a level 2 sponsorship, 76%, 20,000 asked for, $15,000 is the recommended amount for that. Is anybody, would somebody like to move that that is? Thank you, Councillor Mann. Second, Councillor Palmer. Question, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. I suppose, we have done this before, but I suppose it's a procedural question in a way. I imagine there is some discussion about the overall allocation of funding and those who've missed out and that type of thing. But while we're moving these individual ones, it's probably not appropriate to say, well, how did that happen? How did they get 15,000 or any, question that you might like to ask? So all I'm saying is, procedurally, we're moving one motion. Maybe I'll wait until those 3 are dealt with and then we deal with it when the bulk of them are dealt with. But I just find it a bit difficult to speak to the subject.
Well, why don't you ask the question in regards to this one, because then it should cover all of them?
Maybe that is the thing that should happen. Okay, well, with the table's, sort of grace and consent, I suppose the question is, and I'm not sure, we do have our general manager of the area. The assessment process, obviously people miss out and people do gain, support, some support. Can we just let the community know, I suppose, as well as this table, what criterion it is where some of these some of these requests have been, recommended for no money whatsoever?
My sense is that there's an amount of money that we have available to us. It's based on the percentages, and there's a criteria analysis there in regards to the percentages as to how they get funded. I think your question is more over the fact that we have others that don't get anything, as to whether there's a mechanism which enables them all to share in the spoils. Is that?
And I do understand, of course, there's that process. I suppose in more a general explanation of that mechanism.
General Manager.
Certainly. So for this particular funding round, we were heavily oversubscribed. So we've allocated, the panel's allocated $74,000, but the total of funding requests for this round was $174,400. So based on the score, the Deputy Mayor's correct. That's how we decide, or the panel decides or recommends what should be funded. And then obviously there are those events that fall with a lower percentage score, and the recommendation is they're not funded because the funding is exhausted. Does that answer your question, Councillor Walker?
Look, it certainly does. And I think I understand the process. It was, I I suppose, more of an explanation as to what we're working with here. There are some, groups. I mean, the difference between 68% score and getting no funding and 71% and getting, the majority of your funding, or half of your funding type of thing it's quite a step, and it's great to see that there's so many people wanting to access this funding. It's a fantastic sign for Launceston. I suppose, it's just wanting the broader community to understand that and understand what other opportunities there might be going forward. Because, we don't want a situation where these events therefore fall off the agenda altogether.
So I appreciate it's difficult, and there's a lot of good events that have obviously not been recommended by the panel for funding, and it's not that we don't appreciate what they might be bringing to the community, and I want to be careful here not to speak on behalf of the panel because I'm not on the panel, I'm an officer. I think it is difficult when you have very constrained funding. Unfortunately, the situation is based on the scoring, some organisations have missed out on funding. What I would say is that part of the broader event strategy will look at the funding pools for these particular types of events. And my hope is through that process, we will be better able to align intent and budget and nature of event through themes.
Thank you, Acting Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson, a question?
Thank you so much. We note on page 67 of the report, one event was assessed at a different level than it applied for. Specifically, I'm speaking of the Launceston City Cycling Club's Christmas Classic. Was there any committee conversation or officer guidance with regard to considering Launceston's Carols by Candlelight at a level 1 event rather than a level 2, specifically given that as something that presumably does not attract a significant number of bed nights, would be more likened to assessment at level 1?
I might pass this question to the chair of the panel.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, for your question. It actually was discussed when we were deciding on funding, but given the information that was in their new application, they do state that there are interstate and overseas and intrastate attendees expected at the next event. So that actually puts it into a level 2, sorry. We did have significant discussion over this particular event, and given the Mayor is actually associated, he removed himself from the discussion, and we actually did ask him to leave the room on a second occasion so we could have further discussions, just so that we could be sure that everyone that's on the panel was happy with the final decision, and it was decided that it would be kept in as a level 2 for this year, and obviously the acquittal will play a part in that, given if they apply again next year. Hopefully that answers your question.
Happy with that, Councillor Gibson? Would the mover like to now speak to the motion?
Thank you. As General Manager Chelsea mentioned, we were very oversubscribed, which does make the decision of the panel very difficult. As you said, someone who sits at 68% unfortunately missed out on funding, given we only had $74,000 allocated for this round. It's always a very hard decision, but there is a process, and there is a scoring mechanism that determines the percentage. So really it comes down to how well certain criteria is met, and unfortunately with only $74,000 to fund, there were quite a considerable amount of events that missed out this time, which is very unfortunate. It's exciting for Launceston that we have so many people applying for funding and so many events for our community to partake in, and also that we have so many people who are willing to put these events on for our city. So I think that is a positive, and I would love to see a little bit more money in the budget for our events, so that we can help these events continue to be brought to our community. Thank you.
For you, Councillor Councillor Palmer. Question from Councillor Harris.
Yes, just a question, and we've obviously talked about the lack of money in the bucket, and we have allocated that on a first past the post finish, so that everyone who got past the post got their certain amount, and then even the last one, Trevelyan Bowles, only got 3,375, which might be less than they might have done had there still be some more in the bucket. Mathematically, there would have been a way to in fact fund all those events that were deemed eligible from 50% up, and you simply applied a discount to everyone. So instead of getting $20,000, you might have got, let's say, 2/3 of it, so they get $13,000, and apply the same principle all the way down of the actual amounts. My question is, had that been considered as being a fairer way to distribute funds to more events, or was there also the opportunity to look into other buckets of unspent sponsorship money, such as what we have for Mona, to perhaps top up the bucket by some $50,000, which is roughly the shortfall mathematically on the current first past the post basis of giving all events their allocated funds. It comes to about 47,000. So I'll just leave that question there.
Conferring there. Officers?
Does the chair want to speak?
I'll speak to what I can, thank you. We do look at that kind of situation, but is that a fair way to go about it, or is it not a fair way to go about it? I think based on criteria, some of these events obviously rated higher than some other events. So is it fair that we take the funding off them to give it to someone who didn't actually rate quite as so well? It is a very difficult situation to determine whether that's the better way to do it. Is that encouraging people to do better applications by just giving them funding if they're not meeting certain criteria, but we're still giving them the money? So all those kinds of things are discussed, and as a panel we have to determine the best way forward to be able to provide a decent event for the community. You did have another question as well. Yes, that was also discussed. You mentioned the Mona funding. That can't actually be used for this round of funding, if I've got this right. That has to be used for a major event. So I think we could potentially use that money for the New Year's Eve project. But I don't think it could actually, and Nathan, probably you know more about this than I do, but I don't think we could draw from that funding to actually fund the major or the small or the community grants. But you could maybe clarify that.
Acting CEO.
Yeah, so you almost say it's in this, the underspends in this financial year. So from an accounting perspective, we're unable to carry that forward to next capital, which is the next financial year. So each financial year is from an operational expense is addressed on its particular year. So the operational funds don't move from one year to the next. And I might just make the point around the process. The process that was implemented by officers was in line with the policy and the process endorsed by council, which has been applied in previous years. And we recognise that there's issues, which is why we want to review the process. So we're implementing what we believe is endorsed by council in terms of the process and policy.
Thank you. Any other further officer comments?
Just in addition to Councillor McMahon's comments around the scoring and percentages and distribution, and further to the acting CEO's comments, when we have a look at the event strategy and the distribution of funds against each event, one of the things we've identified is at the moment there seems like an inequity because we're not scoring similar events against similar events. And the changes that we propose or that we'll recommend that we make will mean that when we look at each one of those events, we'll be looking at each or scoring each event against similar events. So that distribution of funds in each one of those themes or categories will seem more equitable and better distributed.
Thanks, Ange. Councillor Palmer at last. You get a chance to speak and you don't want to. Okay, would you like to close, Councillor McMahon?
Anyone else to speak?
Oh, sorry, anybody else to speak? My apologies. Did you have your hand up? My apologies, I didn't see it.
I didn't have my hand up, but I was waiting to put it up. Thank you, Acting Chair. I would like to congratulate those people and groups that have been successful in this round, and it is so encouraging to see the competitive nature, albeit that some people have missed out. Indeed, we have heard from the Tamar Valley Peace Network in regards to that. And I certainly, and I know that there will be feedback that goes to those who have missed out. I know that's how it works, and encouragement to reapply and that type of thing. And of course, we are in the middle of a reassessment of our strategy in regards to events. This is not, I don't think in any way a group missing out is an indictment of that group or the event itself. It's a really unfortunate reality that we have found ourselves in this year and in previous years, and hence that review taking place. All I can do is encourage those who have missed out or indeed haven't received the funding that they may have hoped for. And that can sometimes be completely debilitating for an event as well, that we find out subsequently that group says, yeah, unfortunately, we can't accept the money because we can't operate on that level of funding.
We're actually only dealing with one at the moment, so the others we can deal with in the Englobo one.
I understand that, but I think the subject has been broached now. Thank you, Acting Chair. I'm happy to be overruled on that, but I do feel the need to speak to it, and hopefully the other motions as they come forward won't be as complex. But I just, simply wish to encourage those groups to reapply and also to have those discussions where we can find alternative sources of funding, I suppose was my final thoughts there. Congratulations and commiserations. Thank you, Acting Chair.
Any other speakers? Nothing back from the mover. We'll put the motion though. So those all in favour of supporting the funding for Launceston Carols by Candlelight? Against? Just one. Councillor Harris. Motion passed. I might now step out. Councillor Gibson, would you mind taking this next one?
Okay, so we note...
So the Mayor will be out together at 13.3. So the Deputy stepped out now for the Musical Society, which I do believe that there's amendment around this one also. Officer Kate, if you wanted or able to just give a little update to those who have the printed agendas. So it's not for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I believe, anymore.
No, the event now is for The Wizard of Oz. Due to licensing issues, they needed to change the name of their production. The applicant reached out to the assessment panel to notify them of the change, and the assessment panel were comfortable that that was the only variance with their application, that it would be okay to proceed.
Cool. Thank you for that clarification. So looking at the Launceston Carols by Candlelight, the Wizard of Oz, Wizard of Oz with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory change for the Launceston Musical Society, level 1, 76%, $12,500 was the ask. The recommendation is $9,375. Somebody to move? Councillor McMahon? Seconder? Councillor Kai? Question, Councillor Gibson.
Thanks so much for that explanation. It was certainly a question, as I noted the online presence recently of the new production. So just to clarify, you said that the event assessment panel had convened in order to reconsider the change in production. Were there any changes to scoring or any changes to the outcomes that were arrived at by such a successful production, The Wizard of Oz, rather than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory?
Officer Kate.
There were no changes to the scoring. Yes, the change notification was submitted to the assessment panel and they were all in agreement.
So just to be clear, the panel didn't reconvene. It was just circulated that it would be a different production, and was the panel content that the narrative that had been put forward for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory could carry across to a new production?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson.
Another question, if I may. It pertains to productions generally. I note the application of the new event scoring for productions. So whether or not the event is new or not, simply by staging a new production, which makes sense, you wouldn't stage the same production 2 years in a row, that has entitled those applicants to additional scores. Now, certainly this is something new. I haven't seen that applied like such, and I might have missed it, because certainly we've had an enhancement of the way that we have information presented to elected reps in the agenda, which is certainly appreciated. But the rationale around how productions justify the additional points in the new event category versus, for example, a new route if you're a bicycle event, or a new exhibitor if you're a different sort of event. The justification of that application.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. And as the chair, Councillor McMahon, this was something that was brought up around a new production or a new company versus a company that's been existing doing a show that hasn't been done before. Would you like to speak further to the discussions around the table?
We did discuss that, and we felt that generally a new event would be done by a new production company rather than the same production company doing a different event each year.
Yep.
So
exactly.
Yes, I guess that's my question. So all of the productions have received additional points, if you like, which have enhanced their score. So, of course, the Launceston Musical Society is a well-established organisation, as is the case with others in the production, small and large. So if you look at the scores that have been attributed to the production in this agenda of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you'll note that whilst a small percentage in weighting terms, the production has achieved an additional 18 points, which then obviously have helped that percentage be arrived at with regard to it being considered a new event. So the criteria says demonstrate strategies for sustainability and a vision for growth, weighting 1%, total score received for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory / Wizard of Oz, 18 out of a possible score of 30. Is that correct? And I preface it by saying the same could definitely be said for events such as the Peace Festival that have got new performers, or new singers, or a new range of peace events. So I just need to understand that application of the new event category.
Officer Ogulin.
Thank you, Mayor. At the moment, the panel deemed, based on the assessment criteria, that it was a new event because it's a new production. It's something that we're going to consider as part of the events strategy, because what we're looking for here is about the intent of it. And to your points around, and to also Councillor McMahon's points, the intent of getting a new event with a new production company. But as it currently stands, the way the criteria is currently written, the assessment panel made the decision that it was a new event.
So I certainly appreciate your response. I guess the challenge is it's different to the previous response that we got. I personally find it very difficult to apply that criteria, knowing that there are new incentives, there are new mini events contained within some of these existing events. For example, there are new stages in the Tour of Tasmania. I'm not sure that simply putting on a new production demonstrates a commitment to the criteria, and suggests that perhaps, that has unduly affected the outcomes for others in both this large and small category.
General Manager.
We've just confirmed that if you were to remove that, it wouldn't affect the outcome of the scores. And I think maybe I don't want to speak on behalf of the panel chair, but I think maybe the way the question was worded, because it was two parts, we are in agreement, I think, Chair, that it is the way the criteria is currently written, but I don't disagree with you that it is problematic in terms of the panel trying to apply this based on the current wording. So we will very much so be reviewing this moving forward, because I think it's an area that needs scrutiny.
Yeah, thanks. So to clarify your comment, you're saying that the Musical Society would still receive a 76% for their production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory / The Wizard of Oz.
Their percentage would change, their percentage would lower, but their total possible score would be 600 if we were to remove the new event, which would still have them in line with their position at the moment, as in they would still be equal with the Tour of Tasmania. Yeah.
Thank you for the questions, Councillor Gibson. Councillor McMahon is the mover. Councillor Kai is the seconder. Any comments from around the table? Nothing to close? Okay. So moving the recommendation, which is that the Launceston Musical Society, for their production of The Wizard of Oz, receives the recommendation of 75%, which is $9,375. All of those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Okay, Councillor Harris has stepped out, as we do the Rotary Club of Central Launceston Sally's Ride, with the recommendation coming in at not funded, with the ask of $12,500, scoring 59%. So this individual item, looking for somebody to move? Councillor McMahon? A seconder? Councillor Britton? Councillor McMahon?
Thank you. Obviously, we can see that Sally's Ride did miss out this time. And I do remember some of the discussion around the table after we had scored this one, that we felt that Sally's Ride probably needed to find some new ways, I guess, to get people involved with their event and perhaps evolve a little bit more and get a little bit more creative, given that it is such a competitive space wanting funding, that some of the feedback would be that they probably fell a little bit short in the creativity and the innovation area of the scoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Britton, any further comments around the table? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, and I do think this is a good example of a really worthy event that does do fundraising in Launceston, missing out on that funding. I suppose, and it's no criticism of the committee or it's more to go towards our assessment process, which I know is being under review. But now sometimes when something works, it just works, doesn't it? And I do believe that Sally's Ride has done that in the past. So I think we should all just take note of that and recognise that this is, especially this event, because it does raise money, quite, considerable amount of money. It highlights the difficulty, I suppose, that you've had to face as a committee, and hopefully the issues that you can address in reassessing our policy.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. A question, Councillor Gibson.
Thanks so much. Noting, of course, that this is at the bottom of the list in terms of those recommended not for funding, the way that the motion has been constructed this time with recommendations for zero is different to previous, and I reference that only because it's always been the way that if an event for some reason determines not to go ahead, that the officers then are able to go further down the list to allocate the funding that might still be available. So let's imagine, for example, that the Tour of Tasmania does get funded, and then for some reason outside our control, it doesn't proceed. That means the $7,500 available. Because the recommendation is in line with the budget and not in line with the scoring and where the committee saw it, would the intent then be that officers would bring back a subsequent motion for the next in-line event rather than it just going down the list?
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. General Manager.
We might need to come back to you on that question.
Sure. Thank you. Further comments around Sally's ride? Further questions? Anything to close? Okay. Putting the recommendation to the vote. All of those in favour? Those against? So 2 against. Councillor Walker, Councillor Pentridge, all the other councillors are for, so the motion is carried. So now we will go through the balance of the remaining that have no conflicts or declared interests.
Point of order, just to recall Councillor Harris.
He wants to stay out. Councillor Harris would like to remain outside. Okay, so looking at the balance of the recommendations. Somebody to move the balance. Councillor McMahon, a seconder? Councillor Palmer? Councillor McMahon.
You're sick of hearing my voice today.
No.
As I spoke previously, we were very oversubscribed in this area, and as we all sat down to have a discussion around it all, we were all concerned that such a huge portion of them would miss out. We do have some amazing events who got funding. We have some amazing events who didn't get funding. I'm sure there may be some more questions around the table, so I will leave any further comment until later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Palmer is the seconder.
Well, only to add that we are very lucky that so many people applied, and we can't forget that. We have so many amazing events on there that were successful, and we have amazing events that unfortunately weren't successful. And it is just got to keep in mind that we simply can't fund every single event that applies. We wish we could, and I second Councillor McMahon. We would like some more funding in our budget so that we can do that in the future, if possible. That would be wonderful. But I would just like to celebrate all the events that did apply. Congratulations to those that got their funding, and please, for those that didn't get the funding this time round, apply again. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Deputy Mayor, then Councillor Gibson.
Thanks. I just want to stand just to acknowledge the hard and unenviable work that is done by the committee, and it's not just our 2 councillors who have been moving and seconding the motions. We do have external parties who are involved in the process to try and ensure that there's a broader community input into what we do and we don't fund. I acknowledge the level of funding isn't probably sufficient to meet the demands, and it's very sad when you have somebody, or nearly all of the applicants, 60% above in regards to what they do. And we understand the 60% is different because of innovation, it's because of economic drivers. There are a number of things. I think the comments made by the officer earlier about the difficulty in comparing apples and apples to come up with a conclusion as to what's a fair thing to support and not support. So I acknowledge the difficulty, and I'm pleased that we're re-looking at the structure of how we're going to do it. We're stuck with what we've got today, unfortunately, and I'm going to support what's been put forward by the committee today, because I'm not doing it, and I know how hard it is for them that are doing it. I guess my only thought is whether we can come up with some innovative way to look at funding some of those other ones, but we'll leave that for another discussion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Deputy Mayor's covered it really. The task of assessing them, first of all, in isolation, a lot of work goes in by yourself to assessing the events. You put the scores in before the meeting to ensure that the process is transparent and has a good amount of governance around it. And then you discuss and unpack further as part of the meeting, using the benefit of the officer's skills and knowledge, using all of the data that's been captured by those events that have occurred previously from the acquittal, because let's not forget it takes a number of hours to complete an acquittal. It's not just something that sits in the electronic system never to be used, but it's something that informs the conversations of the assessment panel when they come together and benefit from that experience. And then you have, as Deputy Mayor said, all of the experience of the people who are wearing their community or organisational hats, organisations such as the Chamber, such as Visit Northern Tasmania, and others, which is appreciated. It's always been oversubscribed. That's the way it works, because the event strategies of the past have allowed for such innovation and such deliverables from our community, and importantly, such a return on investment for us as a council. This isn't a grant, it's a sponsorship round. That means that we get deliverables that are measurable. We're able to ensure that the value proposition that we are being promised through the application is delivered upon. That's why we don't give them all the money up front. And that's why the acquittal is necessary, and questions are asked if indeed there's a variation from the application through to the acquittal. For me, I think there's a good spread of events across a number of different sectors. I also note that some events, particularly some events that we have been involved with since inception, are not recommended for approval this time, and that's the nature of a competitive field. And indeed, as the Deputy said, there may well be some additional mechanisms for some of those things to be considered. I think when you've got a huge panel, I think when you've got a huge number of officers who go along and provide their expert advice, that you come up with a good result and a broad spectrum of events. I guess I would finish by saying, as I did previously, I think that new event scoring in this instance perhaps wasn't applied the way I saw it. That being said, as we've heard, it didn't necessarily have an impact on the outcome of the final scores. I hope that the Tour of Tasmania application resonated with panel members in terms of the need for innovation, for bed nights, for exposure of Launceston, rather than what it perhaps has been in the past. I only saw, obviously, this year's application rather than previous ones, and I didn't see the acquittal of events past. So that's certainly been the case in the past, but let's hope we're getting better exposure with that particular event than we've had previously. I recommend, as put forward to us, the panel's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. And I know it has been probably a little slightly elongated process today, but I think this is where coming to the nexus of issues that are being dealt with in-house, which is great to hear that we are reassessing our event sponsorship process. I did vote against accepting the recommendation for Sally's Ride to receive no funding. As far as I'm aware, and I might be wrong, but okay, I'll say what I was going to say first. But as far as I'm aware, it's the only event there that is, directly raising money, and I think that's an important thing. I'm not sure how that can be assessed when you look at the participation, creativity, community spirit, economic, tourism profile, and as asset usage. I'm not sure how raising money for people with, medical issues is assessed under that. But I do think it's an important thing, and I do think that it needs to be made note of, that if this does bring out a change in the way that we make those assessments, then so be it. Because I think that's, an important part of community spirit, let's say, an important part of positive economic benefits. And it did score well in those areas. But at the end of the day, it is a difficult task. I thank everyone for the work that they've put into making these assessments, and I will be supporting the bulk of the motion, acknowledging that it was convenient for me not to support that one item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any further comments around the table? Councillor McMahon to close.
Thank you. I'll just firstly clarify a couple of things. Sally's Ride actually didn't perform that well on economic and tourism benefit. So that potentially had some outcome there for that event. There was a discussion around the table too about moving forward. Do we continue to support events that are actually raising money? So that will be something that will probably come up in the next event strategy.
Yep.
And also with the Tour of Tasmania, as far as I'm aware, it does get worldwide coverage through TV networks, so hopefully that will be the same again this year. Having held events myself, it's very important that if you're planning to put on an event that you don't actually rely on funding or grants or sponsorship, because 9 times out of 10 you won't get it. And unfortunately, that's what's happened with quite a few events this time around. I thank Donna for coming along today and having a chat with us. We are disappointed that unfortunately we couldn't give you funding this year, but I do encourage you to keep putting in those requests, and hopefully there will be a time where we can help fund your event, because it is a great event for us. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank the whole team. It's such a long, hard, drawn-out process, and we all do really feel for the ones who do miss out, because we know all the work that goes into these events and what it actually does for our community. So we don't take these decisions lightly. We do think long and hard about it, and unfortunately, we just can't give everybody money. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. So putting the balance to the vote then. All of those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. So now we move forward to small events at 13.3. So in this one, myself and the Deputy are going to excuse ourselves for the Dance Festival and the Cancer Council. Oh, no, I'm going to go to the Dance Festival, then the Deputy will meet me outside. So you run the first, then come and join me, then Councillor Gibson. Yes, just because I'm the patron, I thought it was a little unfair.
So the motion for it is that we approve the sponsorship for the Launceston Festival of Dance. Somebody like to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Seconder, Councillor Kai. Councillor McMahon.
This is a fantastic event. I actually officiated it this last year. I would have loved to have seen them get their full funding as well, but again, we are oversubscribed. And we have some amazing events in this section that are fantastic community events. We were able to give everybody something, as you can see, after we did have the Tasmanian Fashion Festival, who actually have withdrawn their application. So everyone did get a little bit of money. Thank you.
Councillor Kai. Any other speakers? Would you like to close, Councillor McMahon? Okay, all those in favour? It's all councillors present. Motion carried. I'll step out now. I think, Dan, you're back in here.
So presuming that all three, Councillor Harris, Deputy Mayor and Mayor, have a conflict with the Cancer Council of Tasmania's application for the Women's 5K Walk Run, recommended with a score of 81%, requesting $5,000, assessed as receiving and entitled to $5,000, and so a recommendation for $5,000. Are there any members of the public to speak to the Cancer Council? No. Someone to move the Cancer Council recommendation. Thank you. Councillor McMahon, a seconder. Councillor Palmer. Councillor McMahon, do you wish to speak?
Thank you. Obviously, this one is also a fundraiser, so I guess that will come into question whether or not we continue to support fundraisers. But in saying that, I'm not exactly sure of the numbers at last year's event. I don't have it in front of me, sorry. But it is always highly what's the word? Supported. Thank you. Highly supported, and we do see lots of pink T-shirts in the coffee shops and shopping in the city after the actual event. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Palmer is the seconder. Any other contributions to the Cancer Council Tasmania recommendation? Councillor McMahon, anything further from you? Okay, we'll put that recommendation to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 9-0. And we will wait for the team to return.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. So the Deputy Mayor is staying outside with the Launceston players. So the curious incident of the dog in the night time, I do believe. Recommendation is for what? Well, I've got written down in front of me the Launceston players, and that's what. There's Dan. Okay. In the curious, yeah. So not three, no, yep. Okay. Continuing on. So the request was 5,000. Recommendation comes in at 75% at 3,750. Somebody to move. Councillor McMahon. Seconded by Councillor Palmer. Councillor McMahon, anything further?
Another great event from the Launceston Players Society. They always put on a fantastic show, and happy that they got some funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Gibson.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll also be supporting this recommendation. We can't wait to see this show. And like I said previously, it's a difficult one for productions. Again, this has received some additional score with regard to being a new event. It makes sense that the same company wouldn't present the same production 2 years in a row. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So really happy to know that that criteria and its interpretation is being looked at. But this production will be outstanding, and we look forward to it coming as part of a vibrant events calendar.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Anything further around the table? Councillor McMahon, anything to close? Okay, putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. 2, 3. Okay, looking at the balance. So the remaining. Somebody to move the recommendation. Councillor McMahon, seconded. Councillor Palmer. Councillor McMahon on the balance.
Thank you. I think the exciting thing about the small event sponsorship round one is that we have quite a diverse list of events, from magic to PCYC celebrations to the arts, Women's 5K Run, Festival of Dance, Live After 5, music, Poetry Festival, LGBTIQA+ forums. I think we've pretty much done a great job of covering lots of different things for lots of different people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer is the seconder.
Nothing more really to add other than to say that Launceston is absolutely thriving with wonderful events. Great city to be a part of. Thank you very much.
You. Any comments around the table on the balance? A question, Councillor Kai.
I've noticed on the major sponsorship events, I think one of them I got 3,000 in grants, and where with this one, there's $5,000 in grants. I was just wondering, with some of, there was quite a few who didn't get a grant with the major sponsorship. If they were to apply under this one here, is there something to separate whether they were to apply for the major sponsorship or this small event sponsorship? So what was the... Did that make sense? Sorry. Yeah, so the major sponsorship with the last one that only got $3,000 grant, where with this small event sponsorship, there's two $5,000 grants, which to me is like the small event sponsorship, they managed to get more than what the major sponsorship event got. I was just wondering whether if the organisations was to apply under one or the other, is there something to separate saying, no, you have to apply under the major or you've got to apply under a small?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Kai. General Manager, just clarification around the criteria and the different tiers.
Yes, so there's different criteria across both the major event sponsorship funding and the small event sponsorship funding. So I think maybe your question is, could a major go and apply for a small? The other issue you have is that they're run concurrently, so they'd probably have to go and apply for both if they were even eligible against the criteria. Does that answer your question? And I think in terms of who was funded in the majors or missed out on funding, those amounts were higher than the $5,000.
Yes.
Sir? Yes. Yes, but they were applying for more money, and the reason that they got a portion is because there was a leftover amount in the funding pool for that, and then they were given some rather than none due to their score.
A question, Councillor Gibson.
Thanks. And also, isn't it the case that deliberately you have two specific pockets, because it's always presumably that the larger events will be able to demonstrate, in most cases, a bigger score, and you don't want to jeopardise the impact that would have on smaller events not being able to get a portion of the funds.
Excellent. Any other questions, comments around the table? Councillor McMahon to close. Okay, putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Whoops, sorry. Okay, it's 13.4. This is the Three River. So, see you, Deputy Mayor. So, looking at the recommendation for Three River, again, I think the same sort of question will come up, Councillor Gibson, around the recommendation coming in at not funded.
Is it both Three River recommendations that the Deputy Mayor's excluding himself from? Or just one?
What's the second one, sorry?
Oh, sorry. Beg your pardon.
Sorry, yeah. Okay. So, the Three River production with the recommendation that not funded. Somebody to move? Councillor McMahon, seconded. Councillor Palmer. Councillor McMahon?
Thank you. So the main reason why Three River Theatre didn't receive funding is because the panel deemed it as an event and it wasn't eligible for a community grant. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Councillor Palmer? A question, Councillor Gibson?
Thanks so much. Look, just a question, and I certainly appreciate the inclusion of the process. It says on page 95, the following steps form the assessment process for applications. The Grants and Sponsorship Officer receives applications through the online portal. All applications are reviewed by the Sponsorship Officer to confirm eligibility and to ensure all relevant information has been provided. And applicants may be asked to provide additional information. Whilst this question applies to the recommendation that we're considering in isolation, it does also apply to the other two. I'm aware in one instance that additional information was sought from one of those applicants that are being recommended, that the panel deemed that it was an event. Clearly the application demonstrates that it was an event even before the panel saw it. Were there any conversations at all with those three event applicants around redirecting their application or redirecting them to the small events round rather than community grants?
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Officer Kate.
So during the community panel assessment, the event sponsorship rounds for these applications had already been assessed and closed. So that wasn't an option for us. We did look at whether or not there was a possibility for these applications to be considered as a community grant, and I think that it warranted further discussion with the assessment panel, which is why they were taken to the assessment panel meeting.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Appreciated.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments around the table? Anything to close? Okay, putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Okay, now with the balance. Looking for someone to move the recommendation for the ballots. Councillor McMahon, seconded by Councillor Palmer. Councillor McMahon on the ballots.
Thank you. As you can see, we've got some great projects happening in and around the community. One that I think we were all quite adamant about giving funding to was the Just Cats. Given the issues that we've been having out in the community, and we've all had quite a few emails, etc., in regards to desexing cats and issues with cats within the community, so that was a good one. And they're all very worthy community events. As you can see, the Women's Legal Service Tasmania did miss out on funding, mainly because the application just didn't quite stack up. It probably needed quite a bit more work to get that across the line, and then a couple more from the Black Box Theatre and Design Tasmania, because they were also deemed as events. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Nothing further? Any comments around the table? Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. With relation to the Just Cats allocation of $5,000, I'd like to put forward that in future years we actually have a line item in the budget for this. We do have some responsibilities under the Cat Management Act for cat protected areas, and we don't really move in that space. It's really complex, and I completely understand why we haven't. But recent evidence suggests that the best way to mitigate the effects of unwanted cats in the community are council cat desexing programs. The councils on the North West Coast are doing a fantastic job, and the evidence is really clear now that this is the way to go. So I really hope that we take it out of this funding and put it into something more substantial and permanent, because I think the community would absolutely be so grateful for that. The problem right now is only getting worse. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Gibson.
Thanks. I agree, lots of social capital and great outcomes for the community. I hope, as was always the intent with the community grants funding, is that there will be consideration into the future of not funding core business of organisations. It was certainly never the intent of community grants project funding, because that's what the policy clearly says. They are to be projects that do not demonstrate core business attributes of the organisations that are applying. Notwithstanding the incredible work that these groups undertake, and notwithstanding the incredible social impact that is achieved through this, it is a reminder, I think, that in the past, organisations have had to be very creative with the applications and project plans that they've put forward, because this previously has been a very competitive grants round, whereby specific projects from organisations, rather than just reoccurring funding, is what is being supported. And I note there are some specific projects that have been applied for. I also note that there is some core business continuity of funding that's been called for here. Whether or not we need to allocate a proportion of funds to community development for them to tick off against versus putting them through a full application into the future is something that we can consider. But on this occasion, we'll be supporting the community grants round 2 as recommended by the panel.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Any further comments or questions around the table? Anything to close? Putting it to the vote. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Thank you, officers. Thank you, General Manager. Moving into agenda item 14, which is Infrastructure and Assets Network. 14.1 is the Concessional Waste Disposal 24-25 charitable organisations, with the recommendation that Council approves the participating charitable organisations and their recommended concessional entry values for that financial year of 24-25 as listed in the publicly available agenda. Somebody to move the recommendations? Councillor Harris. Seconded by Councillor Palmer. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, this is a good thing we do for our charitable organisations. Obviously, they do attract waste, partly, although many of them have now stopped collecting clothes and many of the other community donations, simply because for many people it was just a way of avoiding the tip fees. And we were, in fact, really providing a way of people to get stuff to the tip via a third party called a community service or charitable organisation. However, most of those have now stopped taking those types of donations. And so what we are getting here now is, in fact, the waste from these organisations. Some of that may well still be clothing and things that, unfortunately, does end up in landfill. It is something that is part of our society of throwing away rather than reusing and recycling. And I do hope that we work to find ways to recycle what can be recycled rather than simply putting what we don't want in a hole in the ground. But nevertheless, applying these waste disposal figures, and I do notice an increase based on last year from some 47,000 to over 53,000 this year. And so I think it's a great thing for our city to be done to our local charitable organisations.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Palmer is the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, this is a good news story. Absolutely, we should be celebrating this. Over 25 organisations that we support, and we should be really proud of that, and over $50,000 worth of money that concessions that we help our community. I'm not going to go through them all, but Door of Hope, the Launceston City Mission, the Lions Club, PCYC, Just Cats, the Community Housing Limited, just to name a few. So it's something that we should be really proud of here at the City of Launceston. Over 25 local organisations that we support. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. I've got a question, Councillor Britton.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just something that jumped off the page. There was an allocation of $2,000 from this budget to the Vets Native Animal Disposal motion. That wasn't utilised in the financial year, so it's been recommended to be removed. Why wasn't that utilised?
Sure.
Do we have a reason, or was it just not?
Yeah, that was...
Leader.
Yeah, thank you. That was made available last year through a motion through the council. It just wasn't utilised, it wasn't called upon. So we probably need to look at why that is. But what we've decided that might be a better way going forward is make it operational, so on a case-by-case basis as they come in.
Thank you. A question, Councillor Walker, then Councillor Gibson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And having previously been on this committee, I sort of had some understanding here, but you know, I note that we don't seem to have any organisations that are progressing beyond a certain adequate level, I suppose, acceptable level of recycling. And I understand that a lot of these organisations are at the tail end of a wasteful society that we all participate in, essentially. But do we see, are we seeing progress, and do we see the possibility that that through recycling or reducing all the different R's that you can think of, that some of these organisations are progressing towards, you know, potentially getting to a higher level, or are we hitting a ceiling, so to speak?
Team leader.
Thank you. Well, I guess when part of the criteria is that they are only allocated 80% of what they used last year. So that's the incentive for the organisation to do more with their waste management, or more sustainable waste management, or however they go about that process. Also, on an individual basis, we do invite them to engage with our waste environmental officers so that we can give advice. Example of that is sometimes we have organisations asking us for like vegetation removal as part of their concessional waste management fees, and that's where we're able to go in and say, hey, have you thought about FOGO and you know, organics diversion through the processes or the services that we already provide. So I guess to answer that, we're working with them. I think a lot of organisations are up against the tide of it though, so yeah.
And a further question to that, and what you said does lead on to this question. It's 80% of the total what they spent last year, not what we allocated last year. So is there a real incentive there where once they know that, look, we're going to go over, we'll spend what we have to spend, and next year we'll get 80% of whatever that is, rather than if it was 80% of our approved budget, obviously that would continue to shrink indefinitely, you know. Is there a design flaw in there in terms of if that is meant to be a motivation for reducing the waste? And I understand the two questions are interlinked in a way, because you can only do so much to reduce your waste.
Yes.
If everything is being done, and it's the same for all of us with our households, you might do everything you can, but you've still got a full bin at the end of the week type of thing. But yeah, it's 80% of what they spend, and as we can see in the chart, that means that their concessions are actually going up in many cases.
Yeah, that's right. If their volumes do go up, then that percentage stays at the 80% of their account, not necessarily what's been allocated within this concessional entry budget. The policy is up for review, so that's the way it stands in the current policy. So there will be an opportunity to have a look at that.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Gibson, a question.
Thanks. Yeah, my question was along similar lines, just with regard to the levers to ensure that essentially they weren't seeking to compete against themselves with regard to that 80% ceiling. My question then specifically is around the almost $10,000 increase that we'll see in the budgeted amount for concessional entry. Is that coming from the budget allocated to this specific area, i.e. the waste centre or waste disposal, or is the additional almost $10,000 that's proposed in the budget coming from overall consideration of funds?
I think, well, the way it stands at the moment, that allocation is coming from the councillor's budget. So it's not coming necessarily out of the waste management budget, that additional 10,000.
Yeah, I think the questions Councillor Walker has asked, I'll echo and say that, you know, we certainly haven't seen an increase of almost $10,000 to other budget lines, i.e. the ones that we just considered. It's great to hear. It's up for review. It's certainly an area that has become much stronger in the 15 years that it's been going, specifically around the need to provide at least a waste management plan. And I know there have been many success stories with regard to organisations working with sustainability officers in order to arrive at a decrease. But I think, you know, we aren't seeing a lot of other grant areas increased by almost $10,000 in their budget. We saw in the previous items that would be welcomed. So let's look at that when the policy comes up for review. That aside, this is a good news story. There are some great successes in this space, and we also equally know that a number of charities have dealt a significant blow with what it is that people expect or leave with them for disposal, which is, of course, a growing problem. So we take all of that into consideration. We thank the panel members for their consideration of this, and we look forward to the policy being reviewed.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, then a question, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Mine's a statement, then a question, because I think the important part is all applicants are required to submit a detailed waste reduction plan in order to be considered for the subsidy. So they can't just put up their hand and say we'll get 80%. They actually have to put forward something for them to be assessed against. So I guess my question to finish that off is, do we then go back and measure their success against that plan at the end of the year?
We don't actively do that at the moment. We judge it based on the way that they, because we do have a lot of repeat organisations applying. So we judge that at the time when they put in their new one for the subsequent allocation.
Councillor Walker, question?
Yeah, I know that recently our Sustainability Department have been working with the Recycle Cafe. I think that the literature that goes with that is saying that money provided by support from the Launceston Council and the state government via the waste levy I'm wondering, is any of the waste levy money, which is being, we are told to be allocated towards education and reducing waste and all that sort of thing, is any of that money becoming available for assistance with our concessional program?
Yeah, so charities and not-for-profits are exempt from the landfill levy. So that's how, I guess, Natural Resources Environment or the state government are managing that. To answer your question, are some of those funds being redistributed back into assisting charitable organisations? I'm not sure.
Sorry, I suppose the question was more, are we able to access some of that money in order to improve outcomes or offer increased concessions, offer decontamination sort of educational advice or anything? In general, what money can we access from the waste levy as a council?
Sure, I can answer that.
Acting CEO?
So in terms of, there's no waste levy that's going back into concessions that I'm aware of. But through Circular North, which we're a member of, they do run a number of grant programs during the year, so that would be the opportunity for some organisations to identify a way in which they could improve, decrease their waste generation and apply for a grant through that process.
Thank you. To speak, Councillor Walker, thank you.
Thank you, and I congratulate Launceston Council and the Sustainability Officer in the work that they have done in this area and continue to do. Waste is a problem for all of us. There's no point pointing the finger anywhere. Decontamination or contamination of waste is probably one of the biggest problems here. We'd all like to recycle. We all do our separation of waste at home, but quite often a lot of these organisations are dealing with waste that is more complex. It can't easily be recycled, and that's why it's ending up going to the tip face and attracting the fees that it does. And the reason I asked the question, I suppose, about the waste facility tariff, whatever, I've forgotten the terminology for it, the waste levy, thank you very much. The reason I ask is because, of course, that's increasing. We are all paying for that. We will pay for that in larger amounts going through for the next few years. We want to see then the results of that and how that will help us as a community to recycle and to divert. And that includes these organisations who, like I said earlier, are dealing with the sort of the runt end of the whole process. They're getting things donated to them that are of no use to them, that immediately are going to waste. They're dealing with various scenarios when it comes to rubbish that just can't be dealt with any other way. So I certainly would implore our sustainability team and our council to find any way that we may be able to apply some of that waste levy or apply for some of that waste levy through the relevant processes to assist, not really in just increasing the amount that we give, concessions that we give, but in concert at least to find better ways to reduce and recycle. We all know that recycling, after glass, especially clear glass and aluminium, the cost recovery for these things is virtually non-existent. So we have large amounts of paper products and different other things that we might generally think we're putting it in our recycling bin and therefore it's going to get reused and recycled. It's not always the case. I mean, it can be, but it's not worth a lot to anyone at the moment. The waste levy puts a value on it, in a sense, but we're yet to see, I suppose, the full fruition of that benefit in the state. So whether that is local recycling, whether it's improvements to contamination, it is yet to be seen. But I'd certainly like to see how it will have some impact on what we're doing in this area with the community and therefore to the broader community over time who are paying for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Further comments, questions around the table? Anything to close, Councillor Harris?
No, other than I just might comment on something that Councillor Walker said. I believe that in addition to glass and aluminium, that cardboard actually has a value at the moment, does go in and out of favour, apparently, according to those who recycle. I'm not sure if it's up or down. I was just trying to look it up to see what the value of it is. But certainly we should encourage people to recycle that. But yes, we're just talking about the operations here of the charitable organisations. So I look forward to our support of them.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Putting it to the vote then, all of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Into Organisational Services Network at 15. 15.1 is the financial report to councillors the 31st of March. So the recommendation is that Council receives the operational and capital financial report for the period ended 31st of March 24, noting that the operational report discloses an underlying surplus of 2.36 million as compared to the budgeted underlying surplus of 3.5 million, comprising of 4.23 million favourable revenue variance and a 1.66 million favourable expenditure variance. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor.
Always happy to stand up and receive reports where we have favourable variances, so a good job. I guess that, again, I probably made this comment last quarter when we put the information out. It's great to see our revenue lines are improving above budget, and that's due to, I guess, good demand for our services and rates improvements and so forth like that. So it's all good news in regard to that, and not coming from infringements and so forth. So that's actually down. So that's good to see. I mean, the negative side, and I reflect on this at the last report, is I guess is our wages savings. I mean, 3-point-something million is a significant amount of wage saving. Some might see that as a good thing, but ultimately it remains our ability to then deliver the services that we sign up to do every year is challenged. I note that's somewhat offset by some of the contracting expenses that we've incurred, and I also note in there's a significant reduction in that surplus because we still maintain holding on to UTAS Stadium. I think it's about 2 million when you add up a couple of items in that. So all in all, a really good result. What I wanted to challenge the Finance Department, not today, but at some workshop in the future, is to actually come back and say, okay, well, where we get to at the end of the year will give us an underlying improvement on what we budgeted to do this year. How that flows into our future sort of long-term plan in regards to what that means in regards to how we then pass on those savings to our community and or how they offset against other expenses and things like that down the track. So I won't sort of delve into that today, but it's something I'd really think the councillors would value, how we actually use that surplus to improve our position going forward and maybe take the pressure off our ratepayers going into the future.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. As the second to Councillor Harris.
Yes, just to perhaps correct what you may have said, I think we have a surplus of 2.36 million as against a budgeted deficit of 3.5. So we were going to be $3.5 million behind income versus expenses. In fact, we are the other way to the tune of 2.36. So as he said, as Councillor Mackenzie said, that's because of increased revenues and decreased expenditure. So it is a good financial position for us, and I too will look forward to how we will perhaps look to carry this efficiency dividend forward to our current budgets for the current year, because we've heard earlier today of how there wasn't enough money in some of our budgets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Now I've got a couple of questions. Councillor Dawkins and Councillor Britton.
Thank you. With regard to the landfill levy and the timing difference, can you speak to how that might affect the financials for the quarter that we're in now, please?
Manager of Finance. Not that one. That one.
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Yeah, that is a timing issue, genuine timing issue, where we didn't receive an invoice in time to close these accounts off. At the end of this quarter, we will, if we don't receive the invoice, accrue that amount based on a best estimate, which are pretty good with the tip gate. So we will take that up and there won't be a difference this quarter.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Britton.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions. It might not be the right time to ask them. But in terms of the $3 million that we're saving in unspent wages, if you look at full-time equivalent, that's thousands of hours a week. What are we doing to fill those positions? Like, do we have 40 or 50 vacant positions, or that's what I'm wondering. Okay. And I do have another question after that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Britton. Actually, we've been able to reduce our vacancy rate in recent months. We've had much more successful recruitment outcomes. At the moment, I think we're running about 10 vacancies as compared to our previous 30, at some stages close to 40. So we're making traction in that space. What we have done as an executive in terms of those unavailable hours is actually restructured workload. It's completely unfair to expect people to do the same amount of work with less people resources.
Thank you very much. And then just another, the Flood Authority sediment management is looking like that won't be spent by the 30th of June. That's $230,000. I was just wondering, A, what works didn't get done, and B, will they be done next year?
Acting CEO?
All the works intended were undertaken. That amount will be adjusted at the end of this week with unspent operational funds going into a couple of capital projects that need to be done.
And I'm happy to take it on notice, but what works in terms of sediment were they?
None. So it's the accounting line we've got just says sediment management, and it's just where the contribution from the state has come in. So the works that will be undertaken is changing the name of that budget line item.
Any further questions or comments? Anything to close, Deputy Mayor? Okay, bring it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. At 15.2, we have rates and charges policy, with the recommendation that council adopts the revised rates and charges policy set out in the publicly available agenda. Somebody to move. Councillor Harris. A seconder. Councillor Walker. Councillor Harris.
So this is the policy that we will then apply to item 15.3 to actually strike the rate. The only item that I wish to speak on is that we will be including the fire levy, that is a state government levy on the independent living units that are operated by not-for-profits, where in the past we haven't levied that fire levy on those units, and it has been carried, if you like, across all the other 30,000 properties in Launceston. So that slight change will mean that they will have a slightly higher bill and that everyone else will get a slightly lower bill, but it is probably counted in cents, the difference, but nevertheless a fairer and more equitable way to apply the policy of the fire levy, which is a state government levy that applies to all residential properties.
Thank you. Councillor Walker is the seconder.
Oh, yes, just to mention that this policy applies the valuation methodology of assessed annual value, which is something that I think every year a discussion is had as to why some people's rates might rise more than others. Essentially, you know, it may be house by house or suburb by suburb, but houses are given a value, and at the moment I think we are receiving letters in the mail just letting us know what our AAV or assessed annual value is if you are a house owner, and that becomes a percentage ratio, if you like. If your assessed annual value has gone up significantly, I know there are sort of checks and balances to make sure that it can't overtly affect your rates, but nonetheless, just because your assessed annual value has gone up doesn't necessarily mean that your rates will go up, or it doesn't necessarily mean that your rates will go down, because it's in the context of everyone's assessed annual values, if that makes sense. It's your slice of the pie, if you like. I don't think there's any easy way to explain it, but I think it's worthy of mention. I'm more than happy if our CFO can explain it better than I can. I'm sure that would be the case, but nonetheless, that is the basis for our rates policy. Thank you.
I think you've explained it very well, Councillor Walker, but I'll just elaborate slightly that if, for example, a property has gone up by 20%, that does not equate to a 20% increase in their rates. We adjust our rate in the dollar so that we're trying to get that 4.5% increase, or as close as we can to most properties in the municipality.
Thank you.
Potential 4.5%.
Further comments around the table? Councillor Kai.
Would the CFO also like to explain about the cap on the 20% increase as well?
Sure, thanks for the question, Councillor Kai. So as you can see in the recommendation, there is a cap of a maximum of 20% for residential properties, which their rates can increase by each year. So that's to give some protection, I suppose, to residential ratepayers that will have a significant jump in AOV. And we do know that there are a number of them. So it's good that we've got that policy position in here.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. Councillor Professor Raze.
Just to make it clear that although it is the rate increase will be 4.5%, still
we're not talking about that.
Oh, not yet. Thanks.
You almost got a point of order out there. Any further comments around this recommendation? This is now a motion. No? Okay. Anything to close, Councillor Harris? Putting it to the vote then, all of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. So looking at 15.3, we have the budget 24-25 rating framework with the recommendation that council, by absolute majority, it adopts the rating framework for the financial year ending 30th of June 2025. Somebody to move. Councillor Harris? Seconder? Deputy Mayor? Councillor Harris?
Never a popular thing to raise, to move the motion to raise the rates. Yes, a 4.5% rate increase on average across the board has been recommended to us by the officers. That sits very well within all our local other governments here in the Tamar Valley. Georgetown 5.5, Dorset 5.7, West Tamar 6.7, Break a Day only 3.5. Obviously Mick Tucker doing a good job down there on the east coast, but Hobart is also at 5.6 and we are at 4.5. So I do think that this is a responsible budget. No increase is simply not an option for any council in reality. A couple of years ago we did hold an increase and had zero after COVID. But you cannot continue to do that because you must catch up eventually. And so this is a responsible increase at 4.5%. It is on average, and because there was a re-rating, as Councillor Walker mentioned, of every property in Launceston this year, there is a low, and most people's value of property went up. Consequently, there will be a lower rate per $100,000 that your house is worth being applied to it, but it should, on average, equal a 4.5% increase, with a maximum, as Councillor Kai pointed out, to only have a 20% increase. So that is part of our rules that sets how much we will increase it. And so I think in the whole scheme of the budget, this is a good budget, and I look forward to anyone else's comments around the table.
Thank you for moving, Councillor Harris. The second, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah. You fail to raise rates by the appropriate amount in a given year causes a rate problem for the future. So I think that unless we want to cut our services, then really an increase is unfortunately like day follows night. I think the reality of it is in the business that we run. I think it's important just to note a couple of other little things there is that our fire levy, I think previously didn't include retirement villages, which is now being spread over over villages, over retirement villages. And I think secondly, it's also noting that we haven't increased our our bin costs for waste. So I think it's also important that we note that we are putting some concessional things in there, albeit we still have to recover the increase in the waste levy for the state government, which is a sort of a flow through. So we're adding it on and we just pass it straight through to the state government. So there are some costs that we can't control and we just collect it on behalf of the government, both being the fire levy and the waste levy. But again, 4.5%, our officers have done a good job in putting it to that level. As Councillor Harris said, it's probably low in relation to pretty well every other council other than the Break a Day Council around the state. So I think we should be lauded for that purpose. Any rate increase will not be seen positively by anybody who's struggling with cost of living, which is a lot of people in our community at the moment. So I'm also cognisant that if people have concerns and ability to pay, then we can talk about hardship provisions and so forth like that. So we have a number of ways that people can interact with us in relation to any issues that they may have in paying those rate increases.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. A question, Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. In relation to those hardship provisions, is there anybody present today who can speak to whether or not people attempting to make use of those is increased as we would have expected over the last couple of years, or are we seeing a flat line, or do we have any data on that? Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Yeah, I can speak to that. I looked at it about 2.5 months ago now with no noticeable increase in requests for services or payment arrangements entered into. So haven't seen anything as yet in an increase.
Can I just add to that, Councillor Dawkins? We have increased the budget allowed for rate remissions as well. So we're certainly cognisant that there are a lot of people out there doing it tough. The customer service team and the rates team are very considerate of how people are travelling as well. So not just remitting rates, but payment terms and things like that are offered very, very often as well. So,
Thank you. Councillor Professor Raze.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify that, although it's an average 4.5%, but some people with increased house prices valuation, some of them 40%, but the maximum will be 20%. It's just like you just mentioned about some people are going to find it really hard to accept higher rates. I'm particularly interested in the elderly people, the pensioners. I think they will be hard done. They are not going to move from their area. Unfortunately, they will say it's unfortunate that it has increased by 40%. And as you mentioned, the council has been considerate to look at somehow to assist them. Is there any way that we can make them aware of that? Because many elderly people probably they don't even know that there is a scheme to help them, and I think that's an important thing we should promote.
yeah, absolutely. I do believe it is in the brochure that we send out with the rates notice, whether it's electronically or in the mail. But I will confirm that, and I will make sure that it's highlighted that people know, and we can do some work with our comms team as well to make sure that everybody knows there's assistance available.
Thank you. Further comments? Councillor Walker?
Thank you. I remember saying at a workshop meeting when discussing rates that I'd just like to see once a year where the rates didn't go up, and the Deputy Mayor, through you, Chair, reminded me that we did see that during COVID. So in actual fact, this is partially what Launceston community is addressing through this rate rise today. Not that it wouldn't be a rate rise most likely anyway. We have inflation, we have cost of living increases, expenditure increases, moderate wage increases and other things that the council deal with. Having said that, 4.5% equates to maybe around about, correct me if I'm wrong, about $5 million an increase in the budget, perhaps a bit more. I'll leave that as a question. As I say, perhaps a bit more. So that's what I suppose essentially we're looking at today, if you put it into that context. I note that we are still in the process of divesting the levy that we used to charge to the Central Business District, which was, I'm just struggling to go back and find it now, I think about $150,000, thank you, year 2 of 4 years of that transition, moving that to the general rate base, which may not seem like a huge amount in the context of things. We're only talking probably, perhaps only 0.2% of the total rate base, something around there. Trying to do maths on the run here, but every little bit counts. And I will note that I did vote against that at the time. It was, from my point of view, unfortunately, moved to the general rate base. But all of these little things do add up, I suppose, and that would be my focus in this process, is where do we find 0.1, 0.2 of a gain? Where do we find alternative ways in which this council can generate income? And I know we've had some very useful discussions in that regard. I know there are different political thoughts, you might say, on what the role of council is in regards to generating income in other ways. We do it, whether it's through collecting of parking fees, perhaps running a retail shop at the QV Mag, running an aquatic centre, thank you. Aquatic centre, even though it might be at a loss, but the gym there and things like that. So you can look around and see that councils can and do activities and different things that do generate income. And I think this is something that we increasingly have to look at, something that I encourage, as councillors would know, at every opportunity that we do look at. There is no harm in that when it is co-linked to a community benefit. We certainly have to be aware of anti-competitive laws where we can't unjustly put ourselves in a competitive advantage to other market players, and we wouldn't want to do that. But I suppose I do digress. It's 4.5%. That's the reality. I accept that, and I accept that council are, in other ways, I'm sure you can always point to areas where money perhaps wasn't spent as wisely as it could have been in hindsight. But I think that I accept in general that we are careful and frugal with the money that is spent in this organisation on behalf of the community. Yes, there are, a range of ways that we can assist people who this may bring additional financial difficulty, but I think for the majority of people, this is a very mild increase. We know that other councils within our island are going to face mild to significantly more increases over this time, up to double what we are increasing today. Does that justify our 4.5%? Not in itself, I suppose, but it does give some context in which to have this discussion. But we should always ensure that we are looking towards becoming more efficient. We are looking towards opportunities for us to spread our income base further than just the rate base that we, by and large, heavily rely upon. That's the nature of being in a council. And to that end, I will be supporting the motion today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Further comments around the table? Anything, Councillor Harris, to close?
I'm not really, other than I will just make comment about to any ratepayer who has financial difficulty. Having spent many years working in an accounts payable area of Telstra, do not wait until the end of August to then ring up council and try to negotiate payments. When you get the bill in the mail in early July, ring up early and you have a longer period to negotiate it, you'll get a much better outcome. So I'll just remind everyone that bills do not go away simply by either not opening the letter or by putting them away off you and hang them on the fridge and thinking about it later. Bills will need to be paid, and so I do encourage that. And as a credit officer, it is always easier to do it the earlier someone contacts you. So with that, I'll leave it for everyone to hopefully support this motion today.
Thank you. Putting it to the vote. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Into 15.4, which is the 24-25 statutory estimates budget. Recommendation is that council, by absolute majority, it adopts the estimated revenue, including capital grants, of 144.4 million, the estimated expenditure under operational and capital, which is 147.5 and 26.9 million, estimated borrowings, loans, LGLP at nothing, estimated capital works there under council funded and externally funded is 24.4 and 2.6 mil. And it also adopts the proposed statutory estimates for the financial year ending the 30th of June as detailed in the attachments for the published agenda. Someone to move. Deputy Mayor to move. Seconded by Councillor Walker. Deputy Mayor.
I think some of this really is a rollover of what we've just approved on the way through, and I note that in our conversations over the last few weeks, we haven't always agreed with some of the things that are or aren't in the capital program for next year. And I'd like us to think those things through going into the new year and see whether there is some ability for us to sort of look at some of those things like the Lilydale pool and various other things that were mentioned in previous iterations. But I'm prepared to pass this on the basis that we do have the ability to look at some of those things post the budget.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker is the seconder.
Thank you, Chair. There's a list of highlighted things there in terms of the statutory estimates budget for 24-25. The recommendation being there that we will be operating in slight deficit, and that is, I suppose, why it is relevant to the previous item where we're striking the rates at 4.5%. In essence, I suppose you're saying if you wanted to run without that deficit, you might want to add another 0.5% or so to that rate base. But this is managed over a series of years in long-term projections and things like that. Notwithstanding all that, yeah, there will be further discussion about some of the items on here. There will be, discussions about these are projects that are potentially planned. And we will get to the annual plan soon, but this is required for our administration to be able to go about their day-to-day business, to be able to prioritise and assess the work that is being done, the complex, varied work that is being done across the municipality. There are particular issues that I will discuss in the annual plan as a result of that. I'll leave that for there, but some of the significant inclusions in the capital works that are listed here as part of this budgetary process: restoring City Park's St John Hart Conservatory, upgrades to Royal Park Skate Park, restoration work on Cataract Gorge's Alexandra Bridge, NTCA master plan. The list goes on, and it's many and varied, I suppose, is the point. And when you think about Launceston Council's assets, they are, in comparison to other councils, greater. Our property list, our parks and reserves, our infrastructure, our ageing buildings, our historic nature of our city, as well as the new and exciting things, I suppose. Whether that be gateway projects and the NTCA master plan and things like that, that are always coming along. So I'll leave it at that, but my point being there that we are operating in a slight deficit scenario that will hopefully be correcting itself in the next few years, and we will be operating at a surplus, and we shall hopefully see better days in that regard in terms of our budget bottom line. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Further comments around the table? Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you. Just like to draw attention to a couple of items that are, particularly as Chair of the Transport Committee, 4.9 million for road resealing and resheeting. This is something that has been ongoing, and we need to continue to put a greater amount towards that as our road assets age from when they have been developed and handed back to council by the developers. They are now at the part of needing rebuilding, and that is a cost to us that continual growth of the physical footprint of the city makes what we approved earlier today with some consolidation and densification within our residential area provides much greater utilisation of that road asset rather than continuing to sprawl onto the edges. So happy that we've got that in there, and also very happy to see the $1.8 million for the Invermay Road, Lindsay Street traffic signalisation, and I assume with the removal of the roundabout there. Certainly that will be a set of traffic lights that needs to be coordinated in much the same way as the traffic lights on Elfin Road and Penquite Road with Hobler's Bridge and David Street, so that the traffic is able to flow through. So I look forward to that and think it's a great plan for us to have, and it's good to see it included.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Further comments around the table? Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, like the Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to support this today on the proviso that we do keep the door open for the possibility of the outcomes that we're looking at down at Lilydale with regards to the pool, looking at the infrastructure that's underneath there, how much money we need to fix that, and also the toddler pool that we have been talking about over the last few months and if not years. So thank you very much. I will support this today based on that there is a possibility to look at how much funding we will require, because we simply don't know at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. A question, Councillor Gibson.
Thanks. My question does pertain to the last item, this item, and indeed the item to come in 15.5. What, through our learnings of our public consultation engagement this year, what refinements and learnings have we determined as staff? No doubt we've met, we've debriefed, we've identified ways that we can consolidate and improve the activities with regard to those processes this year as we move into a new process for next year. What are some of the learnings and outcomes of those discussions that we will see?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Gibson. As everybody knows, we had a much greater engagement with the community this year, and from that have come several learnings. Probably the key learning for us is to do it earlier in the piece when we're starting to form up the budget. So we're working through exactly how that will look. Probably the key issue we ran into was the budget was more or less at a point where we were 90% done, say, with it, and then we put it out for consultation. So we want to try and do that earlier. So we're still working through that internally and how that will look, but we'll obviously engage with councillors throughout that process.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Further comments or questions around the table? Deputy Mayor to close? Nothing further? Okay, putting it to the vote. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. 15.5 is the City of Launceston Annual Plan 24-25, with the recommendation being that Council adopts the City of Launceston Annual Plan 24-25 and notes that a copy of the City of Launceston Annual Plan will be adopted at recommendation 1, which will be made available to the public for inspection and provided to the Director of Local Government and the Director of Public Health. Somebody to move. Councillor Harris. Seconded. Councillor Professor Raze. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. So having approved our budget, this is now the plan of how to spend it. And this is part of our process, I guess. It's multi-step as we work our way through it. In that, there are a number of things that we talk about at more of a higher level at times, whether we are the service provider, whether we're the leader, whether we are the receiver of funds from other levels of government, such as the, I guess, welcome to Launceston, whatever that may be, that we'll be having. So this is just a plan. Like all good plans, not all of it will get done, despite our best intentions at the start of the year, but without a plan, if you fail to plan, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And clearly this council does not intend to plan to fail. However, life will get in its way and some of these items in here will not get done, and other things that aren't in here may well get done. But we must have a plan at a point in time, and it gives the staff a reference to go forward, and then we'll see how we go from there. So it's all part of the process. Having now got the money, this is how we're going to spend it, and I commend it to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. As the seconder, Councillor Professor Raze.
I'm proud that the City of Launceston their annual plan as a roadmap for the delivery of their strategic priorities. I'm particularly proud about strategic priority 5, in which the Launceston City is actively trying to develop and promote health and well-being with the communities. By agreeing our community grants, showed that there are multiple activities about active sport, swimming to basketball, football, and soccer, and which I feel is another way how we encourage people to be active, especially our young generation. Considering that Launceston, Northern Tasmania, we have one of the highest rates of chronic health problems. Can I ask what other activities the Launceston City are promoting to address this health and well-being? Thank you.
As a part of the annual report, which we are speaking on at the moment.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Professor Raze. There is a wealth of work that the organisation does in this space, from promoting activities in our parks for free public access, delivered by Active Tasmania, to engaging with our communities in the northern suburbs around gardening activities and growing healthy food. We have, as you indicated, an extensive sport and recreation portfolio in which our community engage on a daily basis with activity. We've got lots of walking paths and bike tracks and all those sorts of things. I don't have a definitive list in front of me, Professor Raze, but there's lots of things we do.
Great. Thank you. A question, Councillor Gibson.
Thank you. Councillors have been long advocating for an enhanced understanding with regard to the way that reporting percentages are arrived at. We've heard during this year, the 3 quarters that have been reported on, that we're going to see an enhancement of that. What does that look like moving into this new annual plan?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Gibson. We're doing extensive work at the moment about identifying other metrics that we can report on a quarterly basis to councillors in our community, in addition to the delivery of our annual plan items. That will include things like, could include things like the number of development applications approved, utilisation of our aquatic centre, or a vast array of different metrics. In terms of the percentage tracking for these annual plan actions, we're just working through the methodology. Now we have a new corporate planning officer who's really passionate in this space around having defendable metrics with a assessment behind them. So we'll come back to a future workshop. I think we've penciled it in for October, actually, to come back with the first example of what quarterly progress reporting will look like for 24-25.
That's wonderful, thank you, and certainly want to reference that we have been, iteratively improving over, enhancing is the word, not improving, enhancing the reporting already over this last year. So that is great to hear. 2 further questions. There are, of course, a number of projects that, for whatever reason, due to the definition of them, do not meet the criteria for being one of the 51 projects that we're set to endorse today, yet we already have work being undertaken, commitments made, funding or budget lines in order to see the work completed. As an example, let's use the opening of the bike centre, for example. What delineates what is included and what isn't, and what mechanisms are there for the reporting and tracking of those items that don't make it into the 51 actions before us today, but yet are still the work that officers are undertaking?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Gibson. In terms of actions that fall within the documented annual plan, they are predominantly focused on organisational-wide initiatives that would have organisational-wide impact. The same in terms of community-wide impact. You will see larger scale capital projects in there. On a holistic basis, we don't include all our capital projects as part of our annual plan. We have a separate reporting mechanism for capital projects and major operational projects. We're also working on providing that reporting in a clearer way to councillors on an ongoing basis. We've had some great feedback from the audit panel over the last 12 months around how we can enhance that reporting. Our intention is to engage with councillors around that too, so you have a more granular understanding of where projects, particularly capital projects and major ops projects, are in their life cycle. So whether they're in the planning phase, whether we've gone to tender, whether we've awarded a tender, how far we are through delivery. So we're working through that as well.
That's great to hear, because of course we know the work is happening and it's important to capture that across the year, because it's not just these 51 actions, it's so much more. And in many cases, they're very large projects. You know, when you think of something like the Road Safety Centre, that is a huge amount of work. It's going to require significant resource to arrive at the opening, and yet that's the scale of some, and there are many. CCTV strategies, you know, all manner of things. So that's really great to hear and appreciated. The final question pertains to the maintenance and upkeep of our assets. In recent years, you've heard from councillors a significant want to arrive at a much more diligent, informed, ongoing process of reviewing our assets, thinking of structures like halls, like the Albert Hall, like the Princess Theatre, our infrastructure. How is that work and the improvements that we're going to see in that reporting, and therefore the spending that will be allocated into the future for the upkeep of those assets, contained within this annual plan?
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, for the question. Specifically not included in the annual plan. An officer executive view is that we consider that as business as usual. We appreciate the feedback that we've got. We have identified significant room for improvement. We have more dedicated resources in that space, a team that's really passionate and making great inroads into understanding the current status of our asset holdings from a physical building point of view. In terms of our stat estimates, you would have seen an increase in operational budget allocation towards that work as well. So not an annual plan item as you have identified, but definitely a focus on continuous improvement for our business as usual level of service in that space.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Further questions or comments? Councillor Walker? Yes.
Oh, we'll just start with a question. Just to clarify, in my mind, under Roads and Urban Upgrade Program, LCH, Construction and Investigations and Design, what is LCH?
Councillor Walker, that's the Launceston City Heart project.
Yeah.
And I will speak if I may. Thank you. Yes, of course it is a Launceston City Heart. Thank you for answering that question, Councillor Harris. And it is a fine line sometimes between operational and strategic matters in this building, in this chamber. There are items on here that some around this table might not personally agree with. There's some that probably strongly support. If they're purely operational, we possibly shouldn't have an opinion about that. If they're somewhat, at this stage, hypothetical or untested as far as the council chamber goes, then I think there is room for further discussion. One of those items would be the installation on the corner of Invermay Road and Lindsay Street, traffic light signals for a cost of around $1.85 million. Now, I know this item has previously come to council. We all know that this intersection is problematic. We know that this intersection has received additional pressure with a university being built on one side of it. And we know that particularly pedestrians and cyclists have difficulty crossing this road. does that mean that this is the best solution for that? Maybe it is. Maybe that's why it's in this document, but I haven't had that discussion yet. I know that in many parts of the world, there are traffic calming processes that have been implemented that have successfully dealt with corners like this, intersections like this, that ask all traffic, all users, to slow down, be aware of their surroundings and work together to create solutions. I'm not sure if we've explored that or not. I'd like to certainly hear about that. So I'll reserve my judgment in regards to that, but it is a significant ticket item in our budget. The Launceston City Heart construction, investigation and design, also a significant ticket. There have obviously been some delays in that process, so we may or may not see those things come to fruition this year. Let's hope that we do, and let's hope that, again, there's an operational nature to that and also a strategic nature to that. That's an ongoing discussion that's yet to be to come to fruition. Many of the other things, including money for a potential upgrade to the former Frederick Street kindergarten, may or may not cost as much as the amount that's allocated there of $1 million. There is money allocated towards a building that we own in the mall, Virtual's building, for investigations into its development. Something that, you know, strategically, all councillors, I'm sure, around this table would love to see occur. So, big ticket items, very strategic items that are genuinely going to require strategic as well as operational input, the practicalities as well as the future direction of our city and our community. So I will rise to support this today, bearing in mind, or with the caveat, that there are issues here that are yet to be fully discussed, that there may be more than one way to solve these issues. And we will have those discussions, and I would be keen to have the input from the community as well. I think we all use that intersection of Invermay Road and Lindsay Street at some time during the year, if not during the week, if not every day. It's a really busy intersection. And we all want to see a better outcome for people being able to move across there and for traffic to be considerate of those movements. But we also need to be innovative in that respect. If we're going to put traffic lights on every corner, well, we know of the gridlock that we've created, small as it may be in comparison to some cities around the world, no doubt. But for a small city, the gridlock that we have already created with our traffic light system is not going to get better by putting more traffic lights in. So I'll leave that as an ongoing discussion at this stage. I will support initially the concept with the proviso that we have additional discussions in the near future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Further comments around the table? Anything to close, Councillor Harris?
No, I just want to thank my fellow councillors for their comments and look forward to everyone supporting the annual plan here today.
Thank you. Okay, putting it to the vote then. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Okay, so we have at 15.6 the section for the agreed protrusion over footpath, looking for an agreement, over the footpath at 17 Patterson Street in Launceston. The recommendation is that council decides that the protrusion currently extending from the building facade at 17 Patterson Street remain so long as the building remains. There are some other recommendations there, but they're published in the agenda around wording. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I mean, I guess the protrusions over footpaths around Launceston, one might argue, have been there forever. They're actually probably a significant feature to our city in many ways. But I also want to raise the fact that we didn't actually make a decision to do this. We're actually approached by the owner of the property to actually have that protrusion added to get approval on it. So we're actually only doing this because of that. I guess my major issue in regards to all the protrusions that sit over our local highways is safety for our community and the legal liability as to what happens if something happens and they fail. I think I'm assured by the facts that are in the report that are there that the legal liability passes to the owner of the property and not to City Council. So to me, it makes sense, provided it fits within the criteria, not creating a nuisance or potentially creating any other issues for future development in the city. So in this particular instance, I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris is the seconder.
Just a common sense decision on something that's in existence, and whilst we will continue to get these at times, I'm happy that, as I said when we discussed it in workshop, that perhaps at some point in the future this may just become something that a council officer can tick off once the safety has been established, if it is an existing awning. However, at this stage it requires us to actually approve it as a separate item by item. So that's something to look forward to, but look forward to everyone's support today.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I rise to say that I won't be supporting this motion today. I think that we're creating a rod for our own back right here. There will be no doubt other property owners who, if this is passed today, upon hearing that, will think, well, I'd like my awning to be registered on my title too. I don't want anyone tampering with my awning either. Fair enough. I'd probably do the same if I owned a commercial business with an awning as well. But this is the problem. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know whether we might wish to widen a road, change a corner, alter a pedestrian's, footpath, whatever it may be. I was going to say sidewalk, and I thought, no, that's not what we call it. A footpath. So I won't be supporting it today because I don't think there's any necessity for this to be added to someone's title. I don't think there's any necessity, unless, we do have a future requirement, there'll be no necessity for council to ever challenge or remove it. But at the same time, we're creating ourselves an encumbrance. If we put it on the title and for the life of that building, that awning can stay there, I'm not sure how, future councils are going to think of us for doing that when they say, oh, but look what this council did in 2024. They made it so this awning can never be moved while the building stands. I find that extremely problematic. I find that it may never happen. We might not get a plethora of new applications, or we might. I don't know how commercial shop owners feel about their awnings, to be honest. I don't know how it also affects people who don't have an awning, who think that now they should have a right to an awning, which we may or may not agree with as well. And they'll say, but look, you've not only got a shop next door who does have an awning, but you've attached it to their title. And you're saying to me, I can't even have an awning? Who knows? The ramifications could go on. I'm just giving examples. So I definitely won't be supporting it. I see no reason why this should be attached to the title of the property. It is space above public land. It's not a strata title. It exists. We accept that. We all use it. I accept that. But there will be so many varied and different examples of this that will come forward that it will just be an ongoing task. And every time there's a slight variation, let's say it's an awning that has, and you see plenty of them, that are sort of cut around a telegraph pole or something like that. Let's say it's an awning that protrudes ever so slightly above the road. Let's say it's an awning that's very close to the minimum height of 2.4 metres. We're going to have this discussion over and over again because we've begun this process of allowing people to attach their awning to their title, even though it's not their land. I don't see the point of it, personally, and I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. I had a question first. Councillor Britton with a question.
Thank you very much. I kind of partly agree with Councillor Walker and what he's saying. I just want to know that if they don't get the awnings on their title, are they then unable to sell it legally? Like, I'm just, I'm sort of trying to, what is their, why do they want to get it on their title? What is the benefit for them?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Britton. In this instance, A surveyor is required to sign off on the title boundaries of the property. We're not clear why they've engaged the surveyor around that, but they have. The surveyor won't sign off on the title boundaries because the awning is not part of their title. There is the facility under the Conveyancing Law and Property Act for the property owner to apply to have the awning recognised. That has been the recommendation of the surveyor, who won't sign off on their title until that has occurred.
So if they went to a different surveyor, would they hit? I'm honestly just trying to figure this out. Yeah.
Councillor Britton, I don't know. I can't comment on that.
Cool. Councillor Pentridge? Go the questions first. Okay, continue with questions. Okay, so I've got Councillor Gibson and Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Councillor Pentridge. My question is, isn't it the case that the different legislation that is relevant to awnings is in conflict with one another? So the legislation that is promoted through planning and the encouragement of awnings is in direct conflict, indeed, with what we're trying to adhere to through this particular legislation. And so, how does that work in reality in terms of what council might be expecting into the future?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Gibson. I wouldn't agree that they're in conflict. I would say that they are different requirements. So if I had a commercial property and I wanted to put up an awning that extended over the footpath, that's a different requirement in terms of the Land Use Planning Approvals Act. This is a pre-existing awning that predates most of us around this table being in this room, all of us probably. So it has a different a different legislative head of power to get it registered on title. So not in conflict, but different. Does that help?
It does. I guess there is an oddity though, isn't there? Because, the sense of awnings are almost encouraged. Mm-hmm. They are the things that make Launceston, Launceston's buildings come to life in some instances. And yet there is this possibility that it does preclude us as a council down the track, generations to come, doing things that might necessitate us then needing to arrange the buyback of said right. So I guess in isolation, I totally support and understand and appreciate the level of rigour that's gone into this and where it's come from. But I do just wonder, are there any bigger conversations? And these are thoughts that I've had subsequent to the workshops that council should be thinking about.
Yeah.
Just a reflection, Councillor Gibson, nothing will preclude us into the future having a conversation with any property owner, whether they have their awning registered as part of their title or whether they want to put that, it's there and it's not registered, preclude us having a conversation if we wanted to acquire back that interest at a future point in time. There may be financial considerations around that 100%, but nothing precludes that future opportunity.
Thank you. Further questions, Deputy Mayor and Councillor McMahon?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Walker, for your comments, because it's sort of now causing a bit of fluster in my head about it. I guess what I'm trying to understand is the ramification of us not approving it today on the basis that that title stays there and it's the awning actually is there, and or whether we should be saying we're perhaps allowed to have whether there's a further condition that we put in there that at some subsequent date the council may require you to remove that as part of the process, just on the basis that we may need to do something else, and that may give us that protection that we're looking for. So just interested in that conversation, in that position, because there is some sense in what Councillor Walker's actually saying.
That's not the function of the deed that we're recommending to approve this. we'd need a different mechanism if that's what we were going to do. But I'd just highlight, Council has compulsory acquisition powers in respect of highways. So in the event that it became a need in future and we couldn't reach an agreement, we can rely on those powers to take it back and have it cancelled from the title.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon?
Thank you. So we're encouraging inner city living. If somebody wants to, which I know there is one that we have spoken about, where they have inner city living, they're wanting to start a title, but they need approval to have the awning as part of their building. So how does that sit? Like, we're encouraging people to live in the city, but they can't start a title of their building and they can't get the awning approved as part of their property.
General Manager?
It's really an outcome of this council to determine on a case-by-case basis any applications that come before us, because as we've highlighted earlier in the conversation, there is no officer delegation. So if property owners are applying under this piece of legislation to get their awning adhered to their, recognised on their title via deed, it will be an individual decision of this table in every instance.
Thank you.
Councillor Harris, a question?
Yes, my question was just about the legal advice we got about this in regard to whether the property owner could in fact seek compensation from us should we choose to acquire the land or retake over the land and, if you like, cancel their approval to have the awning over the footpath for whatever reason. Do they have to be compensated?
I anticipate, Councillor Harris, that it would be a reasonable expectation if they were losing an interest that had value to their business, that they would expect compensation. As Duncan indicated, if we couldn't reach agreement around what that looked like, it may be that there may be some building owners that said, nah, knock it down at your cost and just repair my facade at your cost. I'm not convinced that that would be the frequent approach of a building owner. But if we couldn't reach agreement around the mechanism, then it would be through a compulsory acquisition process, and that would have probably likely broader financial consequences than reaching a commercial agreement with the property owner.
Further question from Councillor Harris?
Yeah, just a subsequent to that, I recall we had this conversation at Newstead, where the Newstead Bakery was on the corner of Elfin Road, maybe it's Penquite Road by then, and Hobler's Bridge, because of cars continually hitting the awning. Is anyone able to provide any historic on who paid for what? Because he did have to cut back his awning on that particular corner to stop the damage to the cars, or the trucks, and his awning. So I'm just wondering where we've gone through in the past.
I don't remember the particular circumstance, but I do know in the past that we've actually worked with property owners and split costs 50-50 to fix some of those issues.
Further questions? Councillor Gibson?
Notwithstanding, of course, that we're not actively going out and identifying awnings that need to be brought into compliance or attached to titles, and absolutely hearing the point that Councillor McMahon said, that it's kind of like we need a process in order to get sign-off in order to achieve what it is we want. I just would like to unpack further the mechanisms, which I think the legal officer was intimating. So this is one mechanism that is being put before councillors that doesn't include the additional clause with regard to future calling back of the right to the awning. Is there another mechanism that could be utilised if we didn't go down this path to achieve that? So to achieve everything that the developer, the owner, wants, but then the additional step that will allow us, without needing to remunerate, to be able to end that enjoyment of the right at a subsequent date.
Councillor Gibson, on the face of it, the answer is no. The mechanisms that the team leader of legal spoke about, that I have spoken about, are the ones that we are currently aware of from a legislative framework point of view. As Duncan indicated, the deed that we're talking about today is not the appropriate mechanism to deal with the clawback of costs, to use your word. So the answer is not to our knowledge.
And I really appreciate that. And of course, I referenced the advice from both of you, which you pointed out. I guess a subsequent question, and this in no way reflects the standard of the report that we've got, because it's outstanding, it's achieving exactly what the applicant has asked. Is there a mechanism, should we seek to have this item lay on the table today, that we could explore some of these new thoughts that have been raised with regard to future implication, and indeed additional devices within legislation that might work either hand in hand with or subsequent to what is recommended today.
So, Councillor Gibbs, would we lay it on the table because then it will come back as is, or withdraw the item so there can be some further wording and work done and re-presented?
We've had a specific request though, haven't we? So we need to answer that.
That's what I was going to say. We have had a specific request in writing from the representative of the property owner, so we do need to determine it. We have had that request in writing for quite some time.
That point of laying it on the table in order to get an understanding of a body of work that could be undertaken in addition to this specific request with regard to implications that this request might impose upon future councils.
If that's the will of the table, we could certainly do that. It would not be reasonable that it would come back to a council meeting for actually quite a period of time, because that's not a small body of work that you're asking. My personal recommendation would be that councillors, if they aren't supportive of the application as proposed, because the request of the property owner will still likely remain the same. And I understand there are some commercial reasons why they have been encouraging us to determine this matter.
No, I have all of those questions, but I did have Councillor Pentridge, who graciously let others go first, and he'll be able to speak now.
I wanted to address the hypocrisy of all this, and I'm hoping that I won't be supporting it. And I agree very clearly with what Tim Walker was saying. To justify the word hypocrisy, today and other occasions, I've heard about everything from the sky is falling, about what happens if this, what happens if that. We're not consistent in here. We make up rules on the day, normally recommended by council staff. Now, we've got a veranda sitting there. Now, I'm not going to waste everyone's time because it's nearly cup of tea time for me. And that really, I can come up with a million lists of what might happen from the insurance perspective of a veranda. Now, as I heard one of my other friends here saying, right, why should we approve something, right, and risk all these other dreadful things that might happen? So I would suggest that it stays, and I'm hoping that it causes everyone in this room as much embarrassment as the people and the support crew who have talked to me in the last few days about the homeless. So maybe we need to sort of have a bit of a serious look and start being a bit consistent. If we're going to worry about all these safety issues and use that as an excuse to win one argument, and let's apply them right across the board, not have rules of the day. So I won't be supporting it, and I'm hoping it causes as much embarrassment, because I think it is a bit silly personally. I think in the previous meetings we had, the verandas have been here and are a big part of Launceston. But really, think of all the things that might happen. and that wouldn't be fair on the ratepayers of this community, just to please one client or one person, and involve the rest of this community in some huge financial costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pentridge. So I've got further questions from Councillor Britton.
I'm not actually going to ask a question, but I will speak.
Speak, yep.
Is that okay? Yeah. I think Councillor Walker raised some good points, and it made me think as well. Obviously, I think it's made the whole table think. What we've been told, though, if we can compulsorily acquire that later on down the track, I'm quite happy to actually vote yes for this. In terms of all the things and the risks that we might be thinking up now, I think we all too often can suffer more from our imagination than reality. I don't think anyone assumed there was too many risks prior to coming to the table today. Councillor Walker did make a good point. I think we've discussed it. Also, what Councillor McGrath said with trying to encourage inner city living, yeah, I want to encourage that as well. So I will be standing to say yes for this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Britton. Councillor Professor Raze. Still got questions lined up, Councillor Walker.
Just the more I hear, the more I get concerned, and that's what discussion is about. And I feel if we are this one to raise more concern about the resident CBD, because everybody might say, hey, we might as well be happy with our intrusion to be registered, name. And therefore, I don't, why don't we have just do it on, purpose show for building? No matter what have the policy, so it's applied to everyone, so everybody will be happy. We don't need to change the law, just not just for individual. And that's my concern. We are really going to raise more questions and the problem for the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, and I know I've already spoken, but this subsequent discussion has brought more questions and answers in a sense. I suppose it's somewhat like an easement that I might have over someone else's property. You've got the property that's next to the road. I need to drive across your property to access it, and therefore I've got an easement. That is something that sometimes it's an arrangement where I pay you, a certain amount of money per year to use that easement. Sometimes it's adhered to my title. Sometimes it's just a right of way that there's nothing more than a publicly acknowledged right of way. I don't know if that it's exactly the same as that, but I'm just saying that to say, getting to the question, a bit like one of the predecessing speakers, can we not find a way that we can satisfy this surveyor, who seems to be the only surveyor in town that needs this in order to sign off on their building? I might be wrong. And to also satisfy council concerns that we are putting something in perpetuity that may or may not suit council. It might be fine for 100 years, or it might not. I'm not to know. But what would that look like? I suppose is the question. It's acknowledging that this is adhered to that building, but it's not acknowledging that that right exists in perpetuity. That's what I'm getting at. And is there something in there that is reasonably straightforward? Without the surveyor in question here and their rationale for needing it, which is not in the report, as much as I look for it, if someone could explain that rationale, perhaps we could get an answer.
So one of the other mechanisms that we've used in some parts of the city is a Section 71 agreement. So that would be used it doesn't go in perpetuity. It could be for a more limited time. So
yeah, and whether that would suit them or not, I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Further questions or comments? Councillor Gibson.
Correct me, is there an awning adjacent to our council car park right next door? Can someone help me?
Which car park?
The car park that is next to, so Patterson, thank you, lovely, there is not, no, that does not help me. Okay, thank you. It's the only awning, the problem is, it is the only awning on that side of the street. And whilst I'm going to get to my question, whilst I'm not going to be embarrassed at whatever decision we make today, I want to ensure that we do make a decision that is cognizant of all the parts. And I guess I want to reiterate, it is in no way, this has come to us because it's been through a process. We've explored it a couple of times previously. The applicant has asked of us because they can't achieve what it is they need. It in no way reflects upon any officer because we are thinking larger than we have when we've previously been asked to consider it. I guess my question is, one of the legal minds have just said, look, there are other mechanisms to consider which might achieve the same outcome through a different mechanism or might achieve what the surveyor could be looking for that is different to what would be achieved through this mechanism, which obviously is the preferred mechanism. Thus, do we think that we could, and I definitely understand the resourcing, do we think if we were to lay this on the table to at least see what other opportunities existed, it would just take the heat out of this on-the-run decision at the moment, but still hope to achieve the outcome that is sought? Question mark.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. There are a number of opportunities in approaching this item for council. We could lay it on the table and engage with the surveyor about whether there are other mechanisms by which we could engage with to achieve their outcomes. Laying it on the table does mean we bring back the same item. So council would need to understand that when it came back, we would need an amended motion from the floor, and we can engage around that. The other alternative, one of the other alternatives is that we withdraw it to allow officers to investigate further options, to bring back a further conversation at workshop at a future date with a view to forming up a future decision of council. Or you could choose to vote on it today.
Thank you. I guess we can't ask for it to be withdrawn. All we can do is say it in no way reflects the officers. It in no way reflects the process that's been undertaken to date. But if indeed more information could be supplied, maybe it would mean that a different outcome could be achieved into the future.
We've got some movings up here, but I would like to go to Councillor McMahon first.
Thank you. Can I just ask how long this has been sitting with council?
The first time we workshopped it with councillors, I feel like it was February, March. So we've had the application, the request from the property owner's representative since then.
Thank you.
Do you want to jump in before Councillor Pentridge? Yep. You're going to jump in first?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll withdraw the item.
So we can have... Okay. The item's been withdrawn. Do we have nothing? We don't have to do anything. It's no late items?
No.
Okay. Oh. Yeah, right. Okay, councillors, so meeting closed at 4:23, with the next meeting to be held here at 1 p.m. on the 11th of July. Thank you, councillors.